Hello, everyone. Welcome to the meeting of the Tax Council. As you know, this is a public meeting, and we're perfectly happy to listen to questions from anyone in the room if you happen to want to ask them. At the same time, we have undertaken a series of fact-finding sessions around the state, and so far we have had over 1,000 people attend 7 of these sessions, and we've heard from speakers totaling over 125. The economists have been working to build models, and the commission, the council members, and I have been working to listen to what experts in the field have to say. Last week, or last meeting, we heard from experts in tax policy, both from here in Georgia and from Washington, D.C. Today, the focus of our meeting is a little different. Today, we want to talk to, or listen to, those who currently create jobs and wealth in our state, because they have a huge standing and a right to have their say about what taxation policies the state of Georgia imposes. We then are going to listen to a speaker from a city, from the cities, and a speaker from the county, because tax policy at the state and tax policy at the local level is like one hand washing the other. You simply can't make policy in one arena without the impact being either felt or not felt someplace else. And to avoid this law of unanticipated consequences, we want to hear from them and include them in our thinking. And the last session today, it will be a group of emerging industry experts. These are the jobs we hear about becoming part of our country's future, our nation's future, our state's future, and they're industries where America can regain its leading edge in the world economy. And these are the kinds of new jobs that the state of Georgia wants to create, and the policy of the tax policy of the state of Georgia should encourage. We're pleased to have with us the great governor of the state of Georgia. We should give him a round of applause, Governor Sonny Perdue. That's right. Hey, Roy, good to see you. We're going to have a little off the starting point here as part of my introduction. First, I want to hear from Dr. Richard Swindle of Mercer University, who's making this wonderful space available to us. The only thing is, these chairs really stink.
We'll get you some new ones. I'd just like to welcome you on behalf of Mercer University. We always like to take an opportunity when groups meet who don't know much about this place, this part of Mercer, to greet them and just to say that Mercer is in a lot of places in Georgia. It touches much of Georgia, and this Atlanta operation is a big part of Mercer University. We have 3,000 students here. Mercer has been in Atlanta since 1973 on this campus. We have 300 acres, so it's a really great part of Mercer. We also have regional academic centers in Henry County, Douglas County. Of course, we have the historic campus in Macon. We have a regional academic center in Eastman, a medical school in Savannah, and an engineering research center in Warner Robins. So we're all over the state. But on behalf of President Bill Underwood, I'd like to welcome you here. Mercer's a great institution. We're really proud that you're meeting here today, and we just want to welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Normally, we'd hear from this gentleman at one of our fact-finding sessions, but he couldn't make it to the one we needed him at, so we're going to give him 5 minutes today, and that's Ralph Hudgens, who's senator from the areas around Athens. Senator, are you here? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Governor and members of the council and ladies and gentlemen of the audience, I'm Senator Ralph Hudgens. I'm speaking to you today as chairman of the Senate Insurance Committee, which I have been in that position for the last 6 years. And I'd like to address a topic that I think is of paramount importance to this panel to consider the premium tax in Georgia and whether or not we want to continue it. At current time, Georgia's premium tax, which can be up to 4.75%, is the third highest in the nation. And this inhibits the growth of the insurance industry in the state of Georgia. And I think that we would want to have insurance companies come and domesticate and set up their headquarters in Georgia. And I'm going to tell you why I feel that that would be great. They're good, high-paying jobs. It's a clean industry. There's a lot of stability in insurance companies. And I think that we could make Georgia one of the most attractive states in the United States for the insurance industry. I've got some figures here of how many companies are domesticated around the United States, and Georgia has 103 domestic insurance companies. Now, we have a 4.75%, up to 4.75%. You can get some credits and get it reduced down, premium tax. You look at Arizona, it has 327 domestic insurance companies. They have a 2% premium tax. Florida has 617 domestic insurance companies. They're at 1.75%. Illinois has a 0.5% premium tax, and they have 617. Illinois is 371. I won't bore you with all these figures. All these states that have less premium tax than Georgia does, they're more attractive to an insurance company to domesticate in that state. So Georgia's premium tax is in two portions. 2.5% goes to the cities and counties, and those of you here with ACCG and GMA, I'm not talking about doing away with that. I would like to see us do away with the state's portion, which can be up to 2.25% on the premium that is written in the state of Georgia. Now, why would I want to do away with that? It's because of the retaliation that surrounding states exercise against Georgia domestic companies. Let's say that a Florida company, which has a 1.75% premium tax, does business in Georgia, which is 4.75%, they pay the Georgia rate. They have to pay on the premiums they write. If it's a Florida company, they have to pay the 4.75% on the premium that they write in Georgia. But correspondingly, if a Georgia company writes in Florida, they don't pay the 1.75%. They pay the 1.75% plus a 3% retaliation tax against the Georgia domestic companies. And so this makes it very disadvantageous for an insurance company to be based in Georgia because they have to pay these retaliatory fees. Now, the prime example of why I would want to do this is because Aflac, which we all know, as a Georgia company, has redomesticated their office into Nebraska so they could get away from this retaliatory nature of all the policies they write in other states. So I'd be glad to give you more information than you care to know, but I would like to come here today and advocate that you consider doing away with the state's portion of this premium tax.
Thank you, Senator. We're glad you're here. Appreciate you taking the time to come. Stick around and watch the fireworks. Our straw boss, Donna Moore, has been particularly effective in getting speakers for these programs. As you can see from the agenda, our first series of speakers are presentations from the three top industries in Georgia: agribusiness, manufacturing, and tourism. I want to put a pin in this because we tried to get a medical representative here because obviously the medical industry is huge and growing. and we weren't able to get one in time, so we're going to do that at a later date. First, we're going to hear from John Kruger. John? What we're going to do is call everyone up one at a time, and then we'll call them all back for questions. So, council members, if you have questions, please hold them. But before I get too far into this, let me introduce the council members and ask them to look around and say hello to everybody. To my right, your left, is Dr. Dave Shoquist, Gary Harkins, Skeeter McCorkle, the Honorable Sonny Perdue. To your right, my left, is Roger Tutterow, whose home base this is, Brad Dixon, Roy Fickling, and Christine Reese, and Jeff Humphreys. And this is a hard-working bunch, and I can assure you that the state has gotten its money's worth out of this council. That was a joke.
I got it.
John Kruger is the Senior Vice President for Public Policy for the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. He works on all their policy issues and government affairs as well. He spent over 20 years in various government and public affairs and media positions before taking this position. He's worked in the legislature in Washington. He's worked in the legislature in Texas and Georgia. He spent a whole life in government affairs and policy-related positions. So he brings to us experience in telecommunications regulation, electric utilities management, economic development, tort reform, taxation, local government authorities, et cetera, et cetera. He currently lives in Marietta, Georgia, and John, we're glad to have you here today.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to you and to the esteemed members of this panel. Governor, thanks for being here. And certainly want to reiterate to you, Mr. Chairman, the appreciation I know we all have for the service that you all have so generously donated on this effort that we consider extremely important. Again, I am here representing the Chamber, and I thought, if we go to the next slide, I thought I'd just give a quick snapshot of who the Chamber is. We represent approximately 3,400 members from all across the state, and we have members in 156 of 159 counties. Now, lest you think we are not doing our jobs, we have literally almost tried to give away memberships in those 3 remaining counties, but there's no business there to be had. So we are a statewide organization representing members who employ over 1 million employees. Next slide. I thought it also worthwhile to take a minute to put our mission statement up there. Again, I'm not going to read it to you, but I've included it so that you can see really the priority of the Chamber is to be the unified voice for business across our state in advocating for a business pro-growth agenda at the Capitol. Probably I'd like to stress the words prosperous, competitive, and responsible. The General Assembly tasked this council with finding ways to make sure our tax code achieves all 3 of these, and I think we can do that through this exercise, though I know it's a heavy lift in a short amount of time. I also thought it worthwhile to take a minute to explain the development of how the Chamber develops our policies. Approximately 3 years ago, we had a fundraising effort to really kind of take the Chamber on a path to more proactive policy development. Chamber was real good at playing defense and letting the General Assembly know what the bills they supported or opposed. But we thought it important as the business community to be on a course to look around the corner and try to find the pressing issues and try to advocate a more proactive approach toward finding solutions. We divided into 9 policy committees over top policy priorities, one of which tax. And I know this council has already had the benefit of hearing from at least 3 of those members, either through testimony in a formal council meeting or at the fact-finding sessions. One of the jobs of of our committees is to develop policy statements that are used really as a filter as we look at legislation each session. And again, the policy committees work with our Government Affairs Council, which are our member lobbyists, down at the Capitol each session again to let the legislators know where we stand on issues. I thought it also, with that in mind, similar to the council's guiding principles, I thought I would share the committee, just briefly, the committee's tax policy guidelines. Again, without reading this to you, I think I can say unabashedly that our underlying goal for tax policy is to provide a foundation for the state that encourages economic growth and job creation. And I want to also stress, and you're going to hear from both sides today, that really the chamber is here and works at the Capitol to represent both sides, the existing business here in Georgia and the emerging growth companies. Both are extremely important, and I think sometimes the work and the history and just the importance of our existing businesses here sometimes get lost in the glitz of new technology. Both are extremely important, and we try to advocate policies that would support both. When it comes to tax policy, and this is a conversation we have, is tax policy is extremely important, but it's really just one of the guiding principles that businesses consider, or one of the factors that businesses consider when they choose to either expand here or to locate here. And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but I thought it worthwhile sharing. Again, as a chamber, we work in a lot of areas, whether it be education, having a trained workforce, transportation, our civil justice system, and quality of life issues in addition to tax. I mean, this is an extremely important part of it, but it's not the only part. Next slide. This slide, again, much like the guiding principles of the council here, these are kind of our underpinning policies that the tax policy committee has come up with as we filter tax legislation. Again, I'm not going to read these bullets to you. You'll have them in your packet, and they'll be on the website. But I wanted to draw your attention to some of the key words really that have probably summarized these bullet points. When businesses are looking for a tax system, and you've heard this in a lot of the testimony before you, businesses are looking for a tax system that's competitive, predictable, and balanced. Next slide. Just as important as the rates and application, which those bullet points kind of addressed, businesses also like a system that is functional and efficient in terms of compliance. Again, I think some of the witnesses you've had before here have pointed out some of the areas where Georgia's improved or is good, but some areas that we can still work on. And again, the chamber's here to support changes to the tax system that make it more efficient and functional and easier for businesses to comply in. Because again, the easier it is to comply, the higher the rate of compliance we've found. Next slide. Now, as part of that compliance process, the chamber also supports creation of a separate tax court that would help provide more uniformity and predictability in the interpretation of state tax law. Again, this is something that you previously heard support for, and I just wanted to reiterate the chamber's support of that. Next slide. In advance of my speaking here, and again, as my background, I'm fairly new to Georgia, last 4.5 years, so I'm still learning your tax system as well. But what I like to lean on is the experts and the businesses and representatives of companies that are experts that serve on our tax policy committee and as part of the chamber. So we thought it would be helpful to survey our members. And really that survey was focused on what parts of the system are working, where do you find maybe some of the disincentives, what incentives or exemptions do we need to make sure we maintain, and then what other, kind of left it open-ended on what other input our members thought the council here would like to hear. So really the last two slides are kind of the meat of what I have to say here. And looking at the survey responses, which again, I thought were pretty representative of our membership and gave a good snapshot of our members' views. And looking at the responses, I thought it was, I was able to break those down into four categories, and you'll see these reflected in the 2 slides. Again, competitiveness is a constant theme you're hearing here when it comes to the tax code, and it's a theme our members provided as well. And I'll quickly go through some of the bullets. Again, rates and application. We've all understood Georgia is pretty good in terms of the rates that it charges, but there are rooms for improvement. And so, looking at are there ways to broaden our base, maybe expand some of the application of our sales tax to additional products or services, and thereby bring down our rates and make us even more competitive. That's something our members are interested in. Also, some of the suggestion focused regarding application on the importance of removing the sales tax that we charge for energy. Again, I think in each of your meetings you've heard that stressed, and our members provided that same feedback. Also, the inventory tax. Now, we have a chance this November to vote at the ballot to remove the state portion, but again, most of our neighbors don't tax business inventory at all, and it makes us less competitive when it comes to getting distribution centers or warehouses. And then an additional one is the sales tax on construction materials. Again, when it comes to looking to bringing new business or looking for expansion of existing business here, we're at a bit of a competitive disadvantage of some of our neighbors with the sales tax we charge on construction materials. Next is continuity and flexibility. Georgia is very competitive with the incentives that it provides new business or business they're trying to attract or businesses that are looking to grow. But again, I think from a competitive standpoint, there are areas for improvement. The quality jobs tax credit, again, there were some tremendous changes made and adjustments made that have been very beneficial. But there's still some concern from some of our members that not all companies are able to access those. So again, I've heard the changes we've made called a game changer when it comes to helping us be more attractive to business. But at the levels that it applies right now, small business doesn't get to really take advantage of that. So our thought was if we could expand that to or reduce the threshold for that to allow small business to take advantage of it, that could really help stimulate some growth. Payroll withholding tax. Again, when it comes to our R&D tax credit, some good changes were made, but right now it only applies for the first 3 years of a startup's operation, and in many instances those companies haven't become profitable enough to make use of the tax, so thought of to make that more flexible. And then tax credit transferability. We allow the sale or transferability of our film tax credit, but some of our members have thought if you could expand and allow transferability for some of the other tax credits that maybe they aren't able to use and that expire, again, that might be more beneficial and provide more growth. Next, last slide, incentivizing job creation and investment. And again, I think some of the points I just brought up also deal with that. But again, looking at business inputs, that's a theme we hear from our members. Our committee stresses that. You've heard it in this room, how really taxing business inputs, only businesses don't pay those taxes. Those flow through to consumers in either higher prices for products or services. So looking at some of the big inputs, sales tax on energy, construction materials, those kind of things, really, as we look for recommendations for changing, be very mindful, and we'd actually request that be specifically in your guiding principles, the caution in taxing business inputs. And then, unprompted, Senator Hutchins, thank you for bringing up the insurance tax premiums. I think that's an area that we as a chamber also think if we could encourage the domestication of insurance companies, there's potential for a lot of company growth here with high-paying jobs. So you gave a better presentation than I could have on that, but we'll just add our our support for that. And then accountability. And I call this accountability. And again, I think there was some mention of this. You know, other states, when they look at any changes to tax exemptions or the tax code, they look at what a dynamic modeling or dynamic forecasting, rather than just a static look on how much did that exemption raise, if it's going away, how much will we lose. I think you've got to look at and the Chamber believes you need to look at the broader picture. If you can forecast the kind of economic growth or activity and additional revenue that might bring in, I think that needs to be factored into looking at the costs of any tax changes. And then exemptions, that's a big focus. I know we read a lot about the examination of current exemptions that are in the code. And we as a chamber would just express caution when looking at those. I think we are fully supportive of the effort to examine them, see which ones are working, are they doing or accomplishing their intended purpose. If they're not, they can't be justified for a business case. I think those need to be considered for elimination. But those that are working, I think we need to be very careful for some of the knee-jerk reaction on some of the public to just eliminate all those exemptions. And the last point I have on here is sunset. If the legislature started doing that with some of the exemptions and put in a sunset date in there, and maybe that's something the committee might want to examine, putting in possibly a 5-year sunset, because again, I think it has to be long enough, if it's a new exemption, long enough to be able to see if it's worked and accomplished its purpose, or if not, let it go away. That's really I guess I will add at the end, a lot of these proposals we understand may carry price tags with them, and there has to be a realistic accounting for what the cost is and the effect it could have on the state fulfilling its core services. But again, I appreciate Mr. Chairman and then the committee and the opportunity to be here.
Great. We're going to bring you back up here at the end for Q&A along with the rest of them, of the presenters. And welcome to all those who've just arrived. Next speaker is Brian Tolar. Where are you, Brian? In the fire. Good to see you, bud. Brian's Vice President of Public Affairs for the Georgia Agribusiness Council. This is the state's broad-based trade association for the entire food and fiber industry. He's been with the council since 1997, and there are over 700 business members of the council. He's worked from everything from regional taxes to water policy, and I read this in your bio, comprehensive statewide water plan by 2011. Is that right?
It's coming.
I'm sure the governor will be pleased to hear that.
He knows all about it.
He received his degree from the University of Georgia, fortunately, that famous football school. And that's a joke. He worked for 5 years coordinating regulatory compliance programs for the pesticide division of the Georgia Department of Agriculture. Brian, we're glad you're here. Thank you.
I'm glad to be here, Mr. Chairman, and thank you and thank members of the council for the opportunity. I've had the privilege of being with the Georgia Agribusiness Council, as was mentioned, for 13 years, and we've got a very diverse membership. We're very pleased with that. That provides us a lot of opportunities. We are like a chamber of commerce for the industry of agriculture. That's our primary focus, and it is also our largest industry, our oldest industry. But we're not the industry of the past. We're the industry of today. We're the industry of the future, and we want to talk about the importance of this industry, not just to the entire state of Georgia, but also to the rural communities, the counties across our state, where this industry is much more vital than what we'd see certainly sitting right here on this campus. But since I don't have a clicker, I guess we're going to do a thumbs up. And we talk about diversity, and I'd be remiss if I didn't comment real quickly on, these are just some of the logos of the organizations that we work with. When you have a big industry, you have a lot of issues that need to be represented, a lot of focus that goes along with that. And so these are just some of those that we focus on. Some of them are inputs sectors, some of them are producers. And if we put them all on this screen, we'd have to wrap it around this building. I'm not here today just as Georgia Agribusiness Council. I'm representing all the folks that you see on the screen because we are all the same industry interest and we all have a lot of the same common goals when it comes to tax policy. When we talk about agricultural diversity, I want to make sure that this group at least gets a chance to see the type of production that we're looking at in Georgia. Now, this is 2008. This is the top 20. And it's by far, when you look at the percent of the Georgia total and look at that farm gate value. The farm gate, we're just talking about on the farm. Well, we haven't gotten to the production once it leaves the farm yet. So just on the farm, but you see the size of poultry, just in broilers is number one, but you have eggs and you come down, you've got pullets further down. So you combine those, it really highlights the importance of poultry in our state. And of course, it's not to diminish, everybody thinks of peaches, they think of peanuts, and they think of cotton, we think of Georgia agriculture. They're all very important as well as our beef industry, our dairy. They're all very important, but I wanted you to get a snapshot of the diversity because it's that diversity that gives us the strength. It's that diversity that gives us the opportunities to have these jobs all across the state. And that's what I want to speak to the support of this industry as we move forward. Wow, that slide's not very good at all. I don't know if y'all can even see it. I wish we'd have talked about this in advance. So anyway, the important point on this, again, it showcases diversity, and I don't have a pointer, but on the right-hand side, this is 2008, this is 1992 on the left. The poultry is the major component, it's the major change. But also, I want you to see in the lower left-hand corner, for the 1992, we were talking about farm gate. Again, just on the farm, we're talking about farm gate value of $6.4 billion. Well, in 2008, that grew to 11.9. So we know that the industry has a lot of potential. We know that there's a lot of opportunities there, but we don't do it by ourselves. We have a great, we're going to talk about football school, University of Georgia. That's great. It's a bad year. I'll give you that one, At least we won the first game. You brought it up. But the work of the university extension through their research and through the county agent system, that education component of this industry is crucial. And also, I'm even going to give, this hurts me inside, I'm going to give Georgia Tech a shout out because Georgia Tech, I know you'd like that. Georgia Tech provides a lot of benefit to our industrial side about how we manage that food when it leaves the farm and goes on poultry processing in particular. The mechanization, the efficiencies that come with how we get the most out of that bird is what's going to make businesses more productive and it's going to drive job growth. So all those potentials are there, not just now, but moving into the future. And so we're on the right track of growth, and we want to continue on that. And again, boy, these maps are brutal. It looked a lot better on my computer screen, Mr. Chairman, but just looking at farm gate, again, just on farm gate, look around the counties, and you can see the colors in particular. Look at that's supposed to be red on the bottom and then blue, but you can see South Georgia and in North Georgia in particular. That's where we're producing the majority of these goods. And that's where the jobs are hardest to find. When they go away, how do we get them back? We want to keep those jobs there. We want to keep the production there. And we can do it with the right types of tax incentives. We have a fair number, as y'all are well aware. And you heard going around the state and doing the, and I'm glad you have more coming, Mr. Chairman, hearing from folks in the public arena about the importance of those exemptions for their bottom line, for keeping their operations functioning. Those are critical for us because, as was mentioned earlier, John touched on that an increase in taxes John mentioned can a lot of times be passed along to the consumer. We all know, I don't have to tell the governor this, we all know that agriculture by and large is a price taker. It doesn't have any place to go. If a tax increase is there, then you got to find a way to make that work within the bottom line of that company, and it's just tough to do. It cannot be passed along. But this just shows the impact again on rural Georgia. Next slide. That's better. Now, once we leave the farm and we start talking about what happens further, and our next speaker, Roy's going to talk about manufacturing as a whole. But when people talk about agriculture and talk about manufacturing, they don't always combine them. But I wanted to make that point in this, and I need to give a shout out to Dr. John McKissick, University of Georgia Center for Agribusiness and Economic Development. That's where this data comes from. I'm a lot of things. I'm not an economist. So this is all his data. But for just the manufacturing in the state, which is $182.5 billion, that's what it was for 2008, 182.5. 45% of that was agriculture related. Now, that's going to be food processing, poultry in particular, peanuts, food and drink, manufacturing, all those types of things that make up that large portion. So When we have the farm gate, that's one value. And then when we move off that into manufacturing, it's a whole nother ballgame, a whole nother set of opportunities. So the impact, what I'm trying to get at on this is the impact to those inputs that are used for farm gate production. That does affect certainly farm gate. But it also affects the opportunity to grow these jobs once it leaves the farm and goes into the manufacturing sector. If we lose the farm gate, then we lose the manufacturing. Some other state will gobble it up. And that's what we don't want to risk. Next slide. Okay, we're sticking with more bad slides but more colors. First off, let's look at the information on the right-hand side. If we look at the entire industry, we look at inputs, we look at production, and then we look at the first level of processing. I'm not talking about grocery stores or anything like that. I'm talking about just to process it into a final product. We're looking at $65 billion, and you've probably heard these numbers several times to the town halls that you've held. $65 billion and creates 351,000 jobs back in 2008. That's pretty significant. If you look at our entire state economy, we are not only the largest, we're the largest by far, and we're very grateful for that. Going below that, if you look, and this slide over here will help showcase this, but 2/3 of our counties, agriculture is either number 1 or number 2 in what they do, how they derive their local income, how they derive the jobs that they need to push their own economy, to serve their communities. And so it's incredibly important to them. And if you look again around the state, primarily, even though the colors are bad, if you look at the dark colors and also focus on the lighter blues, South Georgia is a primary benefit of the entire economic picture that is agribusiness. Those are jobs, again, that are hard to come by, and we need to make sure that we maintain them, not only on the farm, but also in the secondary component. Now, let me also say that this industry, I had to get some additional data because I want to share this with y'all, that while we look at the $65 billion number for 2008, in 2005 we go back, it was $54.5 billion. So we're not talking about just growing from 1992 to 2008. I mean, we're talking about just going back just 3 years in data. For 2008 to 2005. 2005 we were back at $54.5 billion. But also let me say that in 2008, that $65 billion number for this industry generated $1.8 billion in local and state sales tax. So again, our jobs are creating revenue on the other end on the consumer side of the equation. So I want to emphasize that point. We're getting close to the end. The question was asked when I had a chance to speak with Donna. There she is. And we're talking about what the opportunities we want to express in this picture. Well, as I thought about it, it really seemed to me this is more of a bullseye. And I want y'all to look at this as more of a bullseye because the blue presents an opportunity, just opportunity for someone getting into the arena to try to compete in the marketplace. That's supposed to be red. It looks black. But the red is basically where we are now because we have some advantages. We have the cobbled together tax system that we have now. Some people get sales tax exemption on fuels, some don't. Some farm equipment's exempt, some's not. So it's cobbled together, but it helps us. It helps us compete. And then the question was really about, well, what do we do if we want to hit the bullseye? You know, when I was talking to Donna, the question kind of came across, you know, Brian, if we could do something to help hit the mark for this industry, for job growth, for economic vitality, what would it be? And really, it's about changing the perspective on agriculture versus other types of manufacturing. If we look at the component of it being a goods-producing initiative, agriculture's producing goods, Kia's producing goods, Coca-Cola's producing goods, you know, let's focus on the goods part of it and then level that playing field. Because if you look at manufacturing, by and large, a lot of the manufacturing operation, they have sales tax exemptions throughout their process, and then they charge tax on the end product. And that's true for some agricultural operations, but not all. It depends on the commodity you're producing. It depends on what type of equipment that you're using to produce it with. So if we were going to hit the bullseye, it would be to exempt all the inputs on goods producing that is desirable for sustainability, job creation, and then also economic development. Again, it goes back to the point of we are not in a position to take on a tax and pass it on. We have to develop a model that allows us to move the football given the status that we are currently, and also given that we want the opportunity to grow. we're not finished growing. The charts show that we're not finished growing. We want to do more of this. We want to continue to upscale our operations, expand job creation, focus on rural communities, and deliver in all parts of Georgia so that we can grow certainly a healthy state, but a state that we can all be proud of. And agribusiness looks forward to being a part of that process. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Brian. That was terrific. Just to let you know, Brian, don't feel bad. I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and all of our players are in jail.
Well, I'm not going there.
It's a shame Carolina is really not a football school. We have a couple of people we want to recognize. Ben Harbin, who's chairman of House Appropriations, is here. Ben, where are you? Hey, glad to see you. And also Alan Peake, Representative Alan Peake. Good to see you again. And Representative Ed Setzler. Good to see you. Thank you very much for coming. It's always important to have you here for these sessions because it makes it easier for us to communicate when the time comes for us to sit together. Our next speaker is Roy Boyne, who's sitting at the table. I snuck up on there. Roy is president of the Georgia Traditional Manufacturers Association. This association represents Georgia's manufacturing employees in legislative and regulatory matters. He's also president of the Textile Education Foundation, which provides financial and scholarship assistance to support to the Georgia Institute of Technology. He's the president of the Coalition of Georgia Business for Sound Energy Policy. This man has a distinguished record in public service and in service to manufacturing and job creation in Georgia. We're glad you're here. I note that you're also a member of the governing board of the Technical College System of Georgia for 15 years and on the foundation. This Technical College System of Georgia is one of the great gems that the legislature and the governor have developed over the years and stands us in great stead, along with this job training program that we recently collected. Anyway, Roy, thanks for all you do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Governor, Mr. Chairman, and distinguished members of the council. The Georgia Traditional Manufacturers Association is a statewide trade association that serves as an advocate for Georgia's manufacturers. The association really has its roots in the textile industry, having been formed in 1900 as the Georgia Cotton Manufacturers Association. But the GTMA membership is transitioning from one consisting predominantly of textile manufacturing companies and suppliers to that industry to the broader manufacturing base of the state. And while our membership continues to include textile and carpet manufacturers, the association's membership roster also includes chemical, farm and construction equipment, steel, motor vehicles and related parts, medical devices, plastics, foundry products, and fabricated metals manufacturers. The association represents Georgia's manufacturers at the General Assembly and before state agencies such as the Environmental Protection Division, the Department of Revenue, the Department of Labor. I think they're getting ahead of me here on the slides. The State Board of Workers' Compensation, Georgia Public Service Commission. Our members comprise a significant portion of Georgia Power Company's industrial load, and the association intervenes on their behalf in most proceedings before the commission involving electric rates. I thank you for this opportunity to appear today to discuss manufacturing in Georgia and to present the views of manufacturers relative to the work of this council. As a matter of further information, GTMA is a founding member of the Coalition for a Competitive Georgia, a coalition of businesses supporting tax policies that enhance the competitiveness of Georgia's goods-producing employers and thereby foster job retention and creation. This is slide 2. You can go back to that slide. Good. Manufacturing is a vital component of the state's economy. Manufacturing operations across the state number slightly more than 9,900, with the majority located in the more rural areas of the state. And the variety of manufacturers calling Georgia home is impressive and ranges from carpet and textile companies that account for nearly 15% of the manufacturing workforce to motor vehicles and parts, farm equipment, computer, aircraft and aerospace, medical devices, appliance, paper and packaging products, foundry and steel, furniture and fixtures, food processing, chemicals, tires, solar energy, construction and building products, materials handling, and machinery and equipment manufacturing. Slide. As of August 2010, the Georgia Department of Labor reported manufacturing employment of 336,400. This represents a decline of 15,800 manufacturing jobs versus August of 2009. As a percent of total private non-farm employment, manufacturing accounted for 10.6%. This compares with an 11% share in 2009, 13.3% share in 2005, and a better than 16% share in 2000. Since 2000, unfortunately, Georgia has lost 247,000 good-paying manufacturing jobs. Slide. The impact of a declining manufacturing base on the Georgia economy has been substantial in many respects. Viewed simply in terms of lost wages, the impact in just over the past year has been slightly north of $66 million. Of course, viewed in more human terms, the impact of job losses has been incalculable. Manufacturing wages in Georgia are excellent and competitive within the region. The most current reported average weekly wage earnings for the manufacturing sector are $808.30. Manufacturing average weekly wages are exceeded only by those in the professional and business services and financial activity sectors. Manufacturing wages are more than 2.5 times those in the leisure and hospitality sector and substantially higher than those paid in all but 2 of the private sectors. Of course, Georgia's manufacturers are also taxpayers. Corporate income tax and business license fees amounted to $695 million for fiscal 2009, and sales and use taxes paid by manufacturers totaled nearly $285 million. On top of these taxes are the property and local state taxes paid by manufacturers. In addition, the 400,000 Georgians employed by the state's manufacturers also pay income, sales, and property taxes totaling in the hundreds of millions of dollars. By way of comparison with employment in the non-farm sector of Georgia's economy, and Brian did a terrific job in talking about the farm sector, the manufacturing sector compares very favorably. It's eclipsed only by government employment, retail trade, leisure and hospitality, educational and health services, and professional and business services. And as I pointed out earlier, from the standpoint of wages, the manufacturing sector compares exceptionally well. It bears repeating that manufacturing matters to the health of Georgia and to the prosperity of its citizens. And it is more critical than ever to recognize the importance of manufacturing when considering matters of public policy, such as the Council is doing relative to taxes. No less an authority on the subject of the importance of manufacturing than your fellow council member, Dr. Tolar, identified in a white paper published in 2008 5 key reasons why manufacturing matters. And those reasons are as valid today as they were when Dr. Tolar and 2 other distinguished economists and professors at Kennesaw State University and Georgia Southern University identified them as follows. Reason number 1, manufacturing matters in Georgia because it drives wealth creation in communities. The ability of a community or region to grow is linked to the presence of industries that export their products outside that community or region, generating revenue from elsewhere and income to support jobs in the region. Slide 2. Manufacturing matters to Georgia because it remains a significant contributor to Georgia employment. As I mentioned earlier, manufacturing currently accounts for 10.6% of total non-farm employment, with the majority of that employment located in the more rural areas of the state. However, even as manufacturing has fallen at the national level, it has decreased at a faster level in Georgia, dropping over 42% below its 2000 level. Number 3. Manufacturing matters to Georgia because it pays premium wages and provides benefits to employees. I referenced the higher than average compensation earlier. Average weekly wages in manufacturing exceed those in non-manufacturing in more than 85% of Georgia's counties. In many rural communities, a local manufacturer is both the largest and best compensating employer. And comparing just the wage premium paid by manufacturers doesn't take into account the employer-provided fringe benefits, which on a national level were 35% higher than for those in the non-manufacturing sectors. Reason number 4, manufacturing matters to Georgia, because it plays a disproportionate role in the economies of Georgia's smaller communities and rural areas. In 2006, manufacturing represented 7.8% of the non-farm employment in the Atlanta MSA and 15.6% of employment outside of Atlanta. In other words, manufacturing employment comprises roughly twice as large of employment outside the 28 county area Atlanta MSA as it does inside the Atlanta MSA. Further, manufacturing employment is 18% in the 115 counties that are not part of the 5 largest MSAs, Atlanta, Augusta, Columbus, Macon, and Savannah. Finally, for the 26% of Georgia's population that lives in counties that are not in an MSA, the most rural parts of our state, manufacturing makes up 19% of non-farm employment. And 5, manufacturing matters to Georgia because it produces the largest multiplier effect. A study by the National Association of Manufacturers concluded that manufacturing creates more economic activity and jobs than any other sector. Every dollar in final sales of manufacturing products generates an additional $1.37 in demand for products and services that are required to produce the original manufactured product. Of the 15 sectors in the U.S. Department of Commerce classification, manufacturing had the largest multiplier effect. Another widely accepted multiplier involves jobs supported by manufacturing. This ranges from 2 to 3 jobs per manufacturing job. Hence, the multiplier indicates that from about 600 to 900,000 non-manufacturing jobs are dependent on today's manufacturing employment in Georgia. Others have also written extensively on the importance of manufacturing and have identified additional reasons supporting sound public policy that favors manufacturing, which complement and expand upon those identified by Dr. Tolar and his colleagues. Georgia manufacturers support countless charities, and their employees contribute hundreds of thousands of hours to community and charitable organizations. Georgia's manufacturers export to the world market, thereby helping to reduce America's trade deficit. They invest heavily in research and development, independently and through sponsored research at Georgia's research universities that ultimately lead to new product development and increasing levels of productivity. And they set an example for environmental stewardship and sustainability initiatives. You know, the importance of manufacturing is resonating with voters across the country, including here in Georgia. In fact, a majority of Americans are highly concerned about the state of manufacturing in America. And according to a poll of likely voters conducted this past spring by the highly respected Mellman Group, found that voters are anxious about the loss of manufacturing, the economy, specifically the trade imbalance with China, and government spending. Believe that manufacturing is central to our economic strength and national security, want America to regain its manufacturing might and leadership, and will support public policy and strategy that encourages manufacturing growth. I believe that this strong showing of support for manufacturing can serve as a catalyst for action on some of the recommendations that have been brought to the attention of the Special Counsel during its series of public meetings and at council meetings such as today. GTMA and its members have been closely following the work of the council, and several of the association's members have appeared at public listening sessions that have been held across the state. And we're very pleased by the focus on the work product of the council being job retention and job creation. And we're encouraged in that regard that growth enhancing is the first of several principles set forth in the draft of basic principles that are intended to guide the council in its work. I'm also encouraged by the recognition of the importance of manufacturing to Georgia's economy and of the need to address what may be regarded as shortcomings in the current tax structure that work against investment and job retention and job creation. We agree with Dr. Reese's view that taxing business inputs is counterproductive to the goal of encouraging investment and economic growth. And the testimony of the Council on State Taxation was particularly straightforward in that regard. And I would strongly endorse, specifically including as a component of the draft growth-enhancing basic principle, the matter of taxing business inputs. Now, the General Assembly recognized the importance of not taxing business inputs when it passed, and the Department of Revenue did likewise when it promulgated a rule implementing integrated plant theory legislation in 2008. By so doing, Georgia moved from a non-competitive position with regard to taxing certain business inputs to being more competitive with other states. However, Georgia does remain non-competitive with its neighboring states, and really nearly all states, by taxing energy used in manufacturing. This taxing of a business input places Georgia's manufacturers at a distinct disadvantage with competitors across state lines. Because energy is second only to labor as a cost of conversion in the manufacturing process, this added burden is significant. And because energy costs are such a large component of manufacturing, they do influence decisions regarding investment in new technology, plant expansions, labor force curtailments, and realignments. This is particularly true for companies with manufacturing operations in multiple states. Decisions on where to expand operations to meet growing demand and where to curtail operations during times just as we've just experienced are based upon the cost of production, and the operations with the lowest cost of production will be favored. Next slide. The up to 7% sales tax on energy used in manufacturing, coupled with electricity costs that are generally higher than those in Alabama, Tennessee, and the Carolinas, work against Georgia's manufacturers. As recently as last week, I was made aware of the decision of a GTMA member with operations in Alabama and North Carolina to invest in plant expansions in those states rather than in Georgia, largely due to the higher cost of energy. This company's annual electric bill was $1.5 million. Georgia lost to North Carolina. Again, this was made known just in the last couple of weeks. Another major investment in new technology that would have ensured the job retention of better than 300 employees in a rural area of the state, primarily on the basis of non-competitive electric costs. Legislation has been introduced during several of the past sessions of the General Assembly to immediately repeal or phase out the state sales tax on energy used in manufacturing. And while the bills received a very fair hearing, none of them passed, largely due to concerns over their fiscal impact. What did pass during the 2007 session was legislation that capped the cost of various forms of energy used in manufacturing on which the state sales tax is paid. However, this legislation sunsets on December 31st of this year. We're just about finished. GTMA has attempted to calculate the cost of a sales tax exemption on energy used in manufacturing, and we believe that it approximates about $136 million, with $57 million attributable to electricity, $22 million to natural gas, and $57 million to coal. It should be noted, however, that the principal beneficiaries of the exemption in the sales tax on coal are all of the consumers of Georgia's electric utilities, including residential, retail, commercial, and industrial customers. Georgia Power purchases nearly all of the coal consumed in the state and uses it to generate electricity. And it pays sales tax on that coal, then passes that cost along to the consumers who then pay sales tax on that cost. Interestingly, electric Utilities such as Georgia Power Company that generate electricity for resale do not pay sales tax on natural gas. Next slide. While the Tax Foundation assigned a rank of 29th to Georgia in its 2010 State Business Climate, and obviously we'd like to achieve a higher rating, there certainly are many good components to tax policy that are favorable to Georgia manufacturers. These include the single factor apportionment for purposes of determining corporate tax liability, integrated plan application, and the investment, jobs, research and development, retraining, and port activity tax credits. Next slide. We will provide, Mr. Chairman, a list of other items that we'd like the committee to consider. They're listed here, and they'll be provided in your packet. So I thank you again for the opportunity to share the views of Georgia's manufacturers insofar as this important initiative is concerned. Your success in dealing with a wide variety of opinions and facts to construct a set of recommendations that will ensure continued economic prosperity for Georgians and our state is nothing less than essential. And we look forward to continuing to work with you and the members of the General Assembly.
Thanks, Roy. That was great. We are going to bring all of our presenters back up for questions and answers, members of the council, and so we'll get a chance to hear from them again. Gregory Pierce is EVP and Chief Administrative Officer and CFO of the Atlanta Convention and Visitors Bureau. And it's good to see you. This is an industry that drives direct economic impact of approximately $10 billion a year in Georgia. And Greg has been a leader in understanding the machinations of the destination marketing industry and has spoken on a variety of topics at industries, trade associations, and the like. He's a native Atlantan, and he went to Emory University's Gosueta Business School and is also an alumnus of Leadership Atlanta of 2001, as I am, in 1981. I just want you to know that Fannin County, which is my home county, was the wrong color on every one of your charts. We're at the bottom. So get us some farmers up there.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the members of the committee for inviting us here to speak on the hospitality industry in the state of Georgia. While I represent the Atlanta Convention and Visitors Bureau, obviously the Atlanta market is a significant portion of that industry. The one interesting thing about the Atlanta Convention and Visitors Bureau, while we are called the Atlanta Convention and Visitors Bureau, we are probably the only organization of our kind in the state that actually has its contract with the state of Georgia. We don't have any contract with the city of Atlanta. Our contract is with the Georgia World Congress Center because of the state's investment in building the facility back in the 70s. So we have an interesting place. I'm going to go at this backwards for you. There's a lot of fluff in these slides, and we're going to move through them fairly rapidly. Just to talk about what the industry is, and then I'll get into some of the tax stuff. Okay, obviously revenue, employment, and growth. Our purpose is one thing and one thing only. It is to drive economic impact or direct spending into the greater marketplace. In Metro Atlanta, there are approximately 217,000 employees. Hang on a sec. About 34 million people. Now that sounds like an awful lot. $10 billion in average spending on a year. For 2009, we just got the figures in. We went down to about $9 billion. The state of Georgia is a little north of 20 billion, I believe, in economic impact, and I believe on the last slide somewhere in the 300,000s in employment. And depending on how you measure convention centers, we have the 4th largest in the country, and of course, as I said, that is owned by the state of Georgia. And we're the 6th largest hotel market, the 5th largest on some lists if you take out Los Angeles. So now in Atlanta, the interesting thing is that the city of Atlanta, of the 94,000 hotel rooms, actually has only 19,000 of those 93,000 hotel rooms, but they generate a larger pro rata share of that economic impact because of the higher rates and the higher occupancy rates. So our interest in Atlanta is primarily convention driven. We go after the group and meetings market first because our interest is filling the Georgia World Congress Center primarily because then that fills up the hotels. The secondary interest is leisure, travel, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Next. Leisure profile, there are more leisure profile travelers at 23.2 million. Now, overnight stays, that's 12.5 million people. But half of those people from that 12.5 million actually stay with friends and family. So only half that figure is what is staying in the hotels in the metro market. And then some stats on average party size, et cetera. Next slide. The business traveler. While there are fewer of these, they have a far higher value to us. They spend more money. They're on, for the most part, expense accounts. They spend more in restaurants. And as part of this business traveler are the convention and meeting attendees. This market is broken down into 2 segments. It's broken down into the group market and what we call transient business traveler, which is just the business traveler who comes to Atlanta to make a sales pitch to a corporation or for whatever reason. Can you go back to the last slide? 55 citywide conventions in 2009. That number was significantly higher in this year. 2009 was the worst year on record, not only because of the economy, but because we had fewer citywide conventions on the books than we have ever had. And citywides, we define in multiple ways, but they're conventions that will use the World Congress Center and multiple hotels. When we measure the largest citywides, which are the ones that are over 2,500 peak nights on rooms for the hotels that they take, an average year we have approximately 15 of those major citywides. In 2009, we had 12. In 2010, which has been an extraordinary year, if any of y'all have been downtown, we had 19. So it really, the industry lives or dies on what is known as citywide conventions using the Congress Center. Next slide. Just a few slides on what we do as we go out and sell, and obviously there are different ways you sell to different segments of the market. With the leisure traveler, we can't go out and meet every one of them and say, we're Atlanta, come to our city. That is done through advertising, either traditional means or now more on the web. With meeting planners who are booking citywide conventions, you cannot do that with advertising. You have to be face-to-face. You have to have a sales force. So the largest amount of our staff is actual selling force out in the marketplace throughout the country. And we do have an office in Washington, D.C., and one in Chicago. We have people in Chicago. Next slide. Obviously, one of the things that we tout for booking here is the accessibility of Atlanta. Most of this information y'all know, so we can move on. Obviously, we're the largest, or the busiest, as everyone knows, in the world from an airport standpoint. And then from an international standpoint, which most of our major citywide conventions have a significant international portion now. And the fact that these are weekly flights on this chart, the fact that we have so much direct access truly helps conventions like Poultry and Egg, for instance, or International Woodworking, which tend to have 20-25% international. Next slide. From a daily flight, just to give you some information, and again, why one of our big selling points is the fact that anybody can get here from anywhere at any time they want to get here. Next slide. Also, ground accessibility. Our leisure traveler, we call it the rubber tire market because primarily our leisure traveler gets here in their car. And 24% of our leisure travelers are from Georgia, but outside the MSA, which surprises most people. Next slide. Obviously, the centerpiece of what we do, besides the Atlanta airport, is the fact that we have one of the best convention centers in the country, well run, well thought of. Atlanta entered the marketplace with centers this size very early. When I first started my career many, many years ago in this industry, there were approximately 5 cities that had convention centers that were large enough to handle the biggest business that could be booked. There are now probably 30 cities with whom we compete on a regular basis. The marketplace has gotten exceedingly competitive. And of course, the convention space that is out there has far exceeded the demand for the convention space. So in many cases, people are having to buy business, especially in the major cities. Obviously, as part of the Georgia World Congress Center campus is the Dome and the Centennial Olympic Park. Just some of who's meeting in Atlanta, those are some ongoing clients that we have. This year we had a significant portion of medical meetings. Obviously, a 20,000 person group that's a medical convention is going to be far more valuable to us than a 20,000 person group of cheerleaders, for instance, who are staying multiple to a room, that sort of thing. Certainly not on the expense account that doctors are on. Well, cheer sport, it's one of
I'd be careful going there.
it's one of our big clients. Okay, move on. Just to give you an idea of how the hotels break out through the city is there. Next, let's get that. Dining is a big thing. Next. Keep going. I didn't put this together. Keep going. Okay, tax. Thank you. How do we pay for all of this? The hotel tax legislation in the state of Georgia started in the mid-70s when the Atlanta market went to the state with the hotel community saying we want to tax ourselves to support specifically, primarily the industry. Also the Congress Center at the time. This is how the hotel tax, which is 7% in Fulton County, is broken out. The vast majority of the tax goes to the Georgia Dome and the or over 50%. We have 22.5% that we use to leverage to do the business that we do. Next slide. Just to give you an idea of what some other cities' tax rates are. The highest is Boston, just to let you know, it's at 17.45%. Generally, it's a little easier to tax visitors, is the theory, because they're not voting, I suppose, but this is throughout the country, this particular tax. Next. Okay. Now, while the Atlanta CVB, our hotel tax portion that we receive, which is 22.5% of the tax, is about, at this point, down to $8.7 million. Now, most convention bureaus in the countries work primarily off of hotel tax. What we do in Atlanta is we take that $8.7 million and we go out into the private community and we raise the rest of the money. In other words, we use it to leverage what we have in order to make us more competitive with cities like Orlando, who are sitting there with 40 million. Just to give you another idea, one of our big competitors, Las Vegas, the Las Vegas Convention Bureau has a $235 million budget. So it goes Las Vegas, Orlando, and then 3 or 4 of us that are around the $20 million. Next slide. Again, the hotel tax that you'll see. And you'll see the difference in the hotel tax from Orlando and Atlanta. And of course, the Atlanta Bureau, we are only receiving hotel tax from the city of Atlanta while we market and sell really, truly the metro area, because much of what we do, especially in the citywides, has to spread out through the city. And then, next slide. A couple of other things on the tax issues. How am I on time? Okay. There's also a car rental tax on the visitor of 3%. So that is it.
Well, good story. Thanks. Don't go away. There are other three presenters. I know I have several questions, so if we do, I'm sure if you two, I'm sure. Just to get started, I want to ask John Kruger. I took note of, and we've heard a lot about it, of the inventory tax, which, by the way, is mostly a local tax. And in some counties, our research shows that it's as much as 15 to 20%, right, David? 12 to 15% of their property tax base. If we do away with that, or if somebody does away with that, where would you shift the revenues that come from that? That's a lot of dough.
To be honest, I don't have an answer for that, but we do recognize that that's a significant in some counties. Some exempt them through Freeport, but yeah.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Sorry.
Oh, man. Dave, you got a question?
I have several questions, but I'll hold off. Roy, you mentioned that the cost of exempting energy would be $136 million.
Yes, sir.
Is that in addition to the current exemption, or does that include the current exemption?
But there really is, the cap that I talk about expires, and there was very little cost to that because the sources of energy are trading below the cap. So there's really not very much cost at all. So that would be a new cost, yes, sir. But again, most of that, a good portion of that would be to the benefit of all consumers, residential, commercial, and industrial.
To Mr. Boyne, how far would elimination of the sales tax on energy go towards ameliorating our lack of competitiveness with the other states in terms of electricity cost?
Well, it certainly would help. The Carolinas are 7 to 10% better than we are in certain circumstances. Alabama a little bit less. Tennessee is more competitive than we are. So yes, it would help in the decision-making process without a doubt.
So you're saying bring it close?
It would.
Quite close to par?
Right.
Thank you.
And then Georgia would rely on its other strengths to retain and create jobs in the state. Because we do, as I said, we do have some good things going for us. The single factor apportionment, the integrated plant theory, some of our tax credits are all very positive.
Do you happen to know, and actually the other industries represented here too, is Georgia more, or Georgia's industries more energy intensive than the industries in the states around us?
I wouldn't say that that's the case.
About the same?
I think they all have, in the southeast, with the exception of Florida, I'm really talking about the Carolinas, Alabama, and Tennessee, all would have comparably energy-intensive industries.
Thank you.
I enjoyed each one of you. Thank you very much. I really like the bullseye. So Brian, I'll bullseye on you. How much of the input is now of farming inputs is not exempt percentage-wise? Do you have a feel for that?
Well, I don't have a percentage because it depends on what commodity you're producing. By and large, we've just had to hunt and peck at each industry sector as we could over the years, trying to be competitive. Really, as we saw our neighboring states, they may have a certain exemption for fuels and a certain type of production, see swine production. North Carolina is a big competitor. It's probably the biggest competitor for swine production. So a couple of years ago, we were able to get a sales tax exemption on fuels that are used in swine production. That's great. It had a sunset on it, and we weren't able to get that renewed. So for a 4-year period, we were on even par with that component of production. But now we're behind the 8 ball again because we've got, and it was just state exemption. It wasn't local. It was just a state sales tax exemption. But so it depends on what you're producing. And I'm glad y'all found that ag snapshot thing. I forgot to mention earlier, and I have some others for those that fell in love with agriculture while I was up there earlier. We've got some information for you if you'd like to have it.
That's great. Is there anything in the poultry area that really sticks out?
Well, poultry has a lot of very helpful exemptions on the production component. On the processing component, there are some things that stick out. For example, for equipment for a poultry producer, you can get the sales tax is exempt on equipment that you purchase for a poultry house. When you have to replace parts on that equipment, it's not sales tax exempt. It's the same thing for a farmer buys a tractor, sales tax exempt. Need to repair it, not sales tax exempt. So there's components like that. Also, when you get into talking about, like Roy, on the manufacturing component, for energy used in the processing of those birds, well, it is not going to be sales tax exempt. So there's some benefits that could be there if we wanted to go that direction to enhance opportunities for us to grow that part of our economy.
Another question about the energy. If it would cost $136 million to lost revenue to do that, suppose that the state's willing to fork up $136 million in some way that would advance economic development in the state. Not necessarily manufacturing or agriculture, but in general. Is that the best use of that money? Or would it be better to increase tax credits, to reduce tax rates, to provide other kind of benefits? Why is it that energy has been seen as the big issue? Both Georgia Chamber has advocated it, the ag people, manufacturing, we've heard it on the road. But why is it that one item is so important as opposed to other possibilities?
Well, it is the second largest cost of conversion. And in some cases, it close to approximates the cost of labor. So it's a huge factor. And while tax credits are...
Well, we would do $136 million of benefit some way. For example, reducing tax rates or providing credits. Businesses would get a reduction of $136 million.
Well, not only business, but don't forget, if you don't levy the sales tax on coal used to generate electricity, that benefit flows through to every consumer in the state, residential, commercial, and industrial.
That would suggest that businesses would be better off getting the 136 in another way, because then consumers wouldn't benefit.
Well, I'm not so sure that they can use tax credits and other incentives in an equal way. But what they do measure is cents per pound produced or cents per whatever unit of production it is in energy cost. And they make decisions in terms of where to ramp up, where to curtail, where to invest based on the cost of production. And the tax credits, and in this environment when you're not making any money, and you might not have a very large sales or estate tax liability, those credits are not very valuable to you. But the sales tax on energy is something that you pay every month.
Dave, if I could offer a potential reason for my observation is that these guys are good at their jobs. Roy is really good at his, and the chamber's good. And what the difference is, this is a distinct competitive difference between Georgia and other states. Now, when you look later at this council, we'll see the whole ball of wax with the KPMG study over all those factors of business taxes and business competitiveness. I think you'll see a different story, but this is an easy one to pick up because it contrasts with other states, and it's easy to say, and we know how much it costs, and that's easy to do. So these are advocates that are advocating for their businesses, and if we do the energy tax, then there will be other things there too that we need to look at that are where we don't rank up. It's like dating a couple of girls, and one has attributes in one way and one has attributes in another, and we go to one and say, you're not as this as she is, and you're not as this as she is. So that's kind of what happens in this game.
I understand.
You almost got in trouble.
Well, I will say to the governor's point, and as I pointed out in my presentation, there's some areas where Georgia is very attractive. And Georgia is the only state in the region that has single-factor apportionment. That is a great value to folks that manufacture in this state, invest in this state, and export their products outside of the state.
With the decline, just to follow that up, Roy, and get you off the hook here. With the decline in manufacturing, which is breathtaking in not only this state, but in this country, what's it going to take as a nation, or let's focus on a state, to cause people to want to manufacture products in this state? And by the way, thanks for the plug for Roger's work here. He's got a big enough head already, but I'm sure you appreciate it.
Well, it's going to take from the global perspective, it's going to take a national manufacturing policy that promotes and encourages manufacturing. And it's got to be a policy then that the states that can complement. And it's got to involve the states providing a platform for manufacturers that make it conducive to manufacture here. I'll tell you, manufacturers want to stay here and manufacture. You're closest to your market here. There's a lot of advantages to manufacturing at home. And those advantages sometimes are offset by the low cost of production that can be realized offshore.
I'd like for you to send us that list that you made up, and if there are any other thoughts about what could we do to differentiate Georgia as a locus for manufacturing jobs, I'd like to see it.
Yes, sir, we'll do that.
What, on the agricultural side, what is it that we could do to is there enough arable land here to expand agriculture significantly? I mean, what could we do to expand the agribusiness economy, which is obviously a big contributor to our state?
Well, I don't know that we have to do anything to expand the agricultural production. It's going to take care of itself through technology. It's been doing that for a long time. The challenges that we have, and I think it dovetails in, and certainly I don't want to disagree with the governor, but I will say that when we're talking about a competitive disadvantage, we produce, and I put that list of the top 20, we produce a lot of commodities right here in the state. I would love the opportunity to expand the businesses to further process those and keep those here in Georgia as opposed to sending them not only across all of the world, which we're very proud to do, but to do more, create more of those jobs here in our state. So I think there's some opportunities there. I will also say, to your point, Mr. Chairman, is when we were looking at how we can improve for goods producing, to level that playing field, I was looking at those 6 draft principles that y'all had put together. I don't know if you've adopted them yet, but anyway, and I was trying to find out on that list about where we ranked in those, how we could find common ground in those. And I found 2 of them in particular. The first one, which was the issue about the growth enhancing. If we want to create jobs and we want to keep jobs, then we've got to come up with a process that sets that standard so that we're not having to be at a disadvantage with our neighboring states. And then also the 4th principle, which was simple. We have some commodities have exemptions, some don't. Some types of operations have exemptions, others don't. And so if we came across that simple mechanism so that we know everyone's on the same playing field, then we think that benefits the opportunities for economic growth in this state. And I hope that I've answered your question.
Well, it's close, but the further processing, I was chairman of Gold Kist at one point.
Yes, sir.
So I know something about a chicken processing plant.
Yes, sir.
And I realize that the fuel used in the plant is not tax deductible.
Right.
What can we do for the further processing? Do you guys in the agribusiness side have specific strategies you could adopt, and how could tax policy play a role in that? And if you've got plans, let us know and see how we could dovetail in them.
Right. Well, there are plans. There are goals. There are goals of making Georgia. We mentioned the opportunities for tourism. We mentioned the opportunities for economic development. We also want to be the place that produces the goods that we send all over the world, and produce more of the goods that we send all over the world, because we have the infrastructure to do that. If we can get the ports situated where we can have the deepening of the Savannah River, so we can enhance that market. We can produce more goods here that have a direct outlet to be transported. So we have the natural resources, we have the infrastructure, and we have a good system for incentivizing job creation. But what could we do was the question that's put before me. What could we do to enhance it further?
On further manufacturing, for adding to the manufacturing side.
The manufacturing side of it is to create opportunities for the businesses that are here to grow, and we do that through trying to cut down on their inputs. And to us, for the manufacturing segment, Roy's exactly right. The tax on energy is a huge component, not for agriculture just alone, but for the whole broad spectrum. It is the low-hanging, gigantic fruit. And if we could get it out of the way, we think there's tremendous competitive advantages for this state to move forward.
I can see that in the raw material, commodity manufacturing. I'm not sure how that helps us all that much in the further processing, which is where we're keenly interested in, because of Roger's work on manufacturing jobs. This is huge.
Well, I guess sticking on the further processing is we're thrilled to ship products to Russia. I mean, in particular, let's talk about poultry, whether it's China or whether it's Russia. If we have the capability, as those markets continue to grow, and if we can keep the trade agreements up with those countries, that's where the further processing comes in my opinion. It depends on what you want to process, but poultry has a tremendous opportunity to grow. We've already seen what it can do and what it will continue to do, but we have to have a market for it. And if the markets overseas grow, we don't have to worry about what the consumption levels in here. I mean, I know the Poultry Federation would love everybody in here to start eating chicken 3 times a day. That would help. But if we can enhance those markets overseas where they don't have the production capacity that we have, then that production and then the processing of that product to send overseas, there's a lot of benefit in that. There's a lot of growth opportunities.
Anybody want to go? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. It's your turn. He's already talking.
Okay. Actually, I have 2 questions, and the first one I think is for John. You had mentioned some of your on the wish list, remove inventory tax, energy tax, sales tax on construction materials, exempt business inputs, and insurance tax premiums. I agree with all that. And Dave asked the question, I guess, on the energy, what would you replace it with? And you didn't have an answer. So I'll rephrase the question. What would the tax structure look like to you? What would be the optimal tax structure? Because we have to replace those revenues one way or another. Would you rather see higher income taxes? Would you rather see sales tax based, consumption based tax? What would it look like?
And I'll try to answer you, and I hope you understand. I'm here not as myself. I'm here trying to represent a diverse.
Like to see?
Again, and in no way am I trying not to be specific, but I think, and I mentioned kind of at the end, I understood there's a push and a pull here. When you do away with one exemption and there's less revenue, you've either got to replace it or cut spending. And which was an interesting question we also asked our members. What's your solution for the budget deficit, or going forward? Do you raise taxes, cut spending, or both? And I think our members reflected that they understand it's probably a combination of both. I think there's some proposals out there ultimately what those lists were and what our members were responding to on questions and how we make the state competitive. And I think the governor did a good point raising that. So some of those high item wish lists were maybe the easy gets on where our members don't feel that we as a state are as competitive on some big tax issues. But the simple fact is, as it comes to replacing that revenue, I'm not in a position to speak for our membership to say, well, replace this with A, replace A with B.
But do you have a feel for whether your members would rather see the incomes and the production side taxed or the sales and consumption side taxed? Do you have a feel for that?
I would say there that, again, stick with your term, feeling would be that there's an understanding that there would need to be an expansion of the services and products that would be subject to the sales tax. Whether that would be a replacement for providing additional exemptions, or would it provide an opportunity to lower rates? I think it all depends on the numbers. And I know, the council here is kind of putting together a model to put inputs in and see what the price tag are. But I think I'm comfortable in saying that, there would be an acknowledgement that in some level there might be an expansion, again, a broadening of that tax base. So.
Why don't you ask his colleague the same question? Because it's a good question.
Yeah, does anybody else have any?
Yeah, I would certainly concur with that. I think we need to broaden the tax base for sales taxes, consumption taxes.
I've got one more question.
Our only concern with that, at least from the accommodations tax, is that, as you saw from the slides, at 15% where we are now, it's already one of the highest numbers out there. So whether or not raising the sales tax and how that would affect it or not.
Well, actually, my next question was for you, Greg.
Okay.
And that's, you didn't get to get your punchline because you got
Oh, that's okay.
you got cut off. And what is your punchline? I mean,
What?
go ahead.
The punchline, that's a good question. Overall, from a tax standpoint and how we're funded and what the dollars are for, it works for us. So that's the surprising punchline in that. Our only concern is whenever additional taxes are laid on underneath, then again, if we get in a competitive standpoint where we're so much further from our competition, then it gets, it makes us nervous. A number of years ago in the city of New York, they raised their hotel tax up to about 23%. This is a standard textbook case. And they actually were boycotted by some of the meeting planner associations from around the country and lost close to $1 billion worth of business. So they rolled it back down. But
where's Las Vegas on that list?
Las Vegas, they're at 11%, I believe. But, of course, they have 140,000 hotel rooms all in their tax district. So they can afford to, and it's 11% total.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
Good. Anything else? Okay, Dave.
One more for John. I thought I saw on your list of principles something about tax credits should not be narrowly focused, something like that.
I think what the opinion is to be more flexible. I think a more flexible application of tax credits and utilization.
Okay. In terms of the existing tax credits, particularly those focused on economic development, would you say that the tax credits satisfy that principle, or are there things that need to be changed to?
I think what I mentioned is, there's been a lot of improvement, and Georgia ranks really well in its provision of credits, but some of them are, some of our members feel are maybe too narrowly tailored that don't allow, all businesses to take advantage of them. There's maybe not the flexibility provided for to utilize them, and some of them expire. So again, really creating, I think, more flexibility in utilization of them.
We've done a fair amount of research in this matter, and there's a huge, as in millions and millions of dollars of tax credits that just never get used. Why is that?
My understanding is either the triggers that allow them to use them never get, they're never able to take advantage of them. They accrue them, but are never able to claim them based on the regulation.
Anybody else got a thought on that? Roy?
I think that's right. You've got to have got to have income to be able to use the credit. And particularly in this kind of environment where you don't have any income, you're not paying taxes, you can't use the tax credit to offset no tax.
Go ahead. Gary?
One of the interesting things that John brought up was the sale and exchange of tax credits. Is there actually a market place set up for that?
And that's a good question, Jerry. And that's one of the things I think that probably we need to investigate a little more before jumping into that. Right now, the only market is I think the film tax credit that has been again used with some success. I think it'd be important for us to take a look to make sure that is the case before we do that. But it has been a suggestion of our membership that, again, providing for that flexibility, being transferability or sale, may provide better utilization.
Do you know of any other state that has a transferability that we can look at?
I think Pennsylvania is and I have to check with the department. I think Pennsylvania.
If you wouldn't mind
provides
getting
for
back to us on that,
Okay.
because I think that's a real important issue here.
Sure.
You took a good seat. I think I'll move back. Gentlemen, this has been great. I'm sorry if anybody feels like we put you on the spot, but we didn't mean to do that. But you're here for a reason, and that is because you're experts in your field. And the insights that you provided for us today and your recommendations are thoughtful. We appreciate them. A lot of work went into these presentations, and we thank you for doing that. And I commend you, and I ask our group to give you a hand of applause to appreciate the fine work that went into making this thing happen. No discussion on tax policy would be complete without discussing state taxes in conjunction with local and county taxes. We have today our next presenter before our break. And just remember, Lamar, you're the only thing standing between this group and a break, so present accordingly, is Lamar Norton, who's Director of Governmental Affairs for the Georgia Municipal Association. And I got to tell you a little bit about him. This man's had quite a bit of experience. Since January 2002, Lamar's been the Director of Government Relations for GMA. 512 member cities, nearly 100% of Georgia's municipal population, are voluntary members of this association. He's been actively involved in the Georgia Academy for Economic Development, worked with Georgia Power for 33 years. That qualifies you right there, doesn't it? And is a graduate of Bernal and has been a community servant around the state for a long, long time. We welcome you and ask you to speak on behalf of the cities in Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor and members of the council, I really count it as a privilege to get an opportunity to tell you where cities stand on this issue and the various things that we have on our mind. I will tell you first and foremost, I'm not a tax expert. I've been labeled one before, but I do know a little bit about cities.
That puts you alongside all the rest of us.
Well, that seems to be where I'm coming from, Mr. Chairman. The previous four speakers are certainly partners of cities. We couldn't make it without the agribusiness industry, certainly couldn't make it without the manufacturing industry. The folks in the Chamber and the Conventions Bureau are vitally, vitally important to the welfare of cities. I'm delighted that we have an opportunity to follow them and to support some of the things that they're saying. We may not always agree, but we certainly love the opportunity. The overall gist of what I'm trying to say today, and it may get convoluted because I'm old and I forget what I meant to say, but we want to continue the flexibility that we have been offered as cities to continue working with the state and with others to continue to grow the economy for our cities across the state. We want to be able to enlarge that flexibility within the bounds of what's humanly possible and what the taxpayer can stand and what they can't stand. We also believe that local control is the ultimate, that folks at the local level will decide who's going to be mayor, who's going to be council, and what their tax base is willing to support. And we found that to be true every 4 years at election time. This past election, we ended up with about 20% turnover because of dissatisfaction and various other reasons with our local officials. If someone would be so kind as to, thank you. All I'm going to try to tell you is that a little bit about the values of Georgia cities. We're going to talk just a little bit about how as cities grow, the state grows. As the state grows, so do cities. And we're going to try to work from that philosophy. As you know, Georgia cities, we make up a little less than 8% of the total land mass of this state. That's a whole lot of stuff within a small amount of territory. We have about 512 members at GMA. We were formed in 1933 by 56 member cities who had concerns about the way the state was treating cities on taxes. And I find it very interesting that that's still the topic today, some 75, 76 years later. And we think it's still very important to us. We're home to about 41% of the state's population. I will show you something a few minutes later about the growth of cities and the daytime population. About 64% of the jobs in the state are the ones that create the real pressure on the infrastructure that we have in this state. It's something that we try to address every day. There's a lot of activity in just a small area. That's the city perspective. I'm sure my friend Clint Mueller from the counties are going to tell you that they've got this huge amount of territory that they try to satisfy. And so we're both coming at it from a local perspective, dealing similar but not exactly the same. We also represent, as you can imagine, the majority of the commercial property in the state. The source of my report is at the bottom of the slide, so if you have questions about it, we certainly can try to address those. This commercial property right now is in a very stressful situation. We have a lot of vacancies. We have a lot of opportunity within our cities, and the transition of cities over the next few years is going to be very, very important, and we hope to point a couple of things out. Also, we're fortunate enough to have about a little less than half the industrial property in the state is within our cities. That too presents opportunities, and it presents problems as well, and we try to address those. I can't begin to tell you how gratifying and how pleased that the city of West Point and LaGrange are to have Kia down in their vicinity. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. It's caused them some infrastructure problems with water and sewer, but they're working through it because they've got all these jobs there, and it's a great opportunity for the state, but it's also very good for our cities as well. Significant fact to us is that we've got about a little over half of the tax-exempt property in the state, talking about property tax exemption located within the cities. That doesn't mean that you stop serving public service, fire, police, other services that these folks need because it's still there, and even though they're property tax exempt, we still have to have a presence, roads, streets, and so forth. Just very briefly, when the state has budget cuts, it does impact cities. We don't get a tremendous amount of money from the state, but it does impact our relationship with the Department of Community Affairs in particular, and with a lot of the university systems, the universities across the system that we work with from time to time. It does impact their role and what we're able to do with them as well. Where does our money come from? We in 2008, fiscal year 2008, the revenues of cities, $6.84 billion. Of that, about half went into the general fund. The other half is in enterprise funds. That's our utility funds. That's a lot of cities. I think there's 51 cities have electric utilities. About 105 have municipal gas systems. We've got water and sewer, and those may comprise our enterprise funds. With the revenue comes expenses and debt. So that is not profit by any stretch of the imagination. That's just the revenue produced to pay the debt that we've got on the majority of those systems. Our general fund, property tax, sales tax, and so forth. And we have really strived to create balance among our general fund revenues. This slide, hopefully you can see it okay, tries to tell you that as on average, this is an average, this is not one particular city, it's the average of cities. We like the fact that there's a balance to it, 27%, 22, 18, 16. If that were what every city could use and could actually do, then I think it would be very helpful and certainly more pleasing to the taxpayer of any city in the state of Georgia. As you know, we pay county taxes. If you're a citizen of the city, we pay county taxes. We also, in a lot of cases, pay city property taxes. We have a little over 100 cities that do not have a city property tax, and I'll try to explain a little more about that in just a few minutes. But again, it's balance that we're trying to reach as far as the revenue sources across the state, as far as our cities are concerned. The population growth of the state, I've heard the governor use in several of his presentations that we grew about 1.5 million people. That's absolutely true. We agree with that wholeheartedly. And it was a huge burden to the state, and it was also a burden to our city population. But the added burden to that is, and we're thankful for this. I don't mean to sound like we aren't, because the jobs and because of where they're located, we like to see the fact that population growth has grown 34% in daytime population over the last decade. That we want it to grow even more. It taxes our infrastructure, our roads, our streets, our water systems, but yet it's still there. And after you look at all these numbers, what we're still talking about as far as taxes are concerned is the amount of flexibility we have at the local level to try to ensure that the revenue is there to provide a safe, viable economic base for the state. And that's our ultimate goal. I'm going to tell you just a couple of things as examples. The city of Decatur, they have no access to sales tax. They have one of the highest property tax rates, city property tax rates in the state. They sell a quality of life that people are running to in the city of Decatur. Wasn't true 20 years ago, but they built quality condos, apartments, other facilities that has really drawn the population to Decatur. They've also have a terrific city school system. We have 21 city school systems across the state, and it bodes well for any of our cities if they've got one that performs at the level that the city of Decatur does. Well, Decatur makes it work just on a high property tax rate, city property tax rate. They'd love to have more flexibility. They'd love to have access to a penny sales tax so that they could lower property tax and lower the overall assessment of that obligation. People in Decatur will tell you in a heartbeat that they like the walkable, safe streets. They like the fact they've got over 90 restaurants and bars. That's a quality of life that they enjoy. The population shift over the last 2 decades has been very fascinating and something that a lot of us really enjoy. It is not for everybody, but it certainly works for Decatur. Columbus is interesting because Columbus, as you know, has a property tax millage rate. They also have a local educational splosh. They have a 2% local option sales tax. 2004, some of the legislators that are in this room and former legislators were responsible for helping Columbus have a second penny of local option sales tax that gives them operation and maintenance money to be used at the local level if it's approved by the population. First time they ran that out in 2004, it was overwhelmingly defeated. It had only been enacted about 6 months, I think, and it was overwhelmingly defeated by the local residents. They brought it back last year, about 13 months ago, and it passed by about 70% because they had identified how they're going to spend that other penny. And they put some limitations on it, and it was overwhelmingly passed by about 70%. What they did, they put the majority of the money in public safety. That's what the community wanted. They felt there was a need for it. They supported it, and then the rest of it would go primarily to road improvement over the life of that local option sales tax. It's a really good story because since then, the Army and the federal government has said that the population of Columbus is probably going to increase by a significant number of soldiers that are added to that base, and they certainly need the money to make it work. We think that O&M flexibility is really an opportunity for us to roll back property tax at the city level, but also to add some new revenue for the maintenance of the capital facilities that have been built over the years. Another one that will give you just a little different scenario is the city of Stockbridge, just south of Atlanta. They have no city property tax. They're one of the little over 100 cities that don't rely primarily on sales tax and various fees that they get. A lot of times the state limits on fees we would love to discuss and debate, but there's some things that Stockbridge makes it work. What the services they need, the type public service they want to provide, they're able to do it with sales tax and the various fees. These three cities could be 10,000 miles apart, but they aren't. They're just a few miles apart, quite honestly, but there's three different scenarios that work for them. We recently had 17 city managers in our office to discuss some of the revenue problems that cities face, some of the budget problems they face, and then some of the expenses that they actually face. And it was interesting, 15 of the 17 were very different economies within this state. They're geographically dispersed around the state, of course, but 15 of the 17 had different stories. Some based their economy on their utility service, some based it on their military compliance in the local community, some on tourism, as you would imagine with Savannah. And then it was very telling that one size does not necessarily fit all. We make tax policy a lot of times at the state level that says we'll do this and it applies to everyone equally, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. For years we've asked for a municipal option sales tax. It would be a sales tax that would be used for M&O in some cases, time limited for the special needs. City of Atlanta has that now for their water and sewer system. We have other cities that would love to have that opportunity. As one of the suggestions I would make to you is some consideration at some point to let the local people decide whether they're willing to pay an additional sales tax penny to do some of the work that might enhance and grow their city. The fourth one that I don't have a slide for is the city of Cartersville, and it's a very fascinating story. When Anheuser-Busch came there in the mid-'80s, I want to say 85, 86 era, I remember being a part of the Georgia Power team that went to St. Louis to meet with August Bush IV. And Mr. Bush was very nice to our CEO, who was heading our team, and one of the finest gentlemen I've ever met in my life. And Mr. Bush told him and thanked him for coming. We were in there a little less than 30 seconds because he said, if Georgia Power can't provide me with water, sewer, and pre-treatment of sewer, rail, gas, and electric all in one package, I'm sorry, I'm going to find somebody else to do it. And we were out the door in less than 30 seconds. It took him longer to say hello to us than it did for him to tell us what happened. Now, they made a terrific business decision. I say that to say that the city of Cartersville won that job from an electrical standpoint and also a utility standpoint. Only now are they beginning to realize the benefits of that. Their bonds were 20 years. They made a terrific investment in that plant. And it's very important that when the big one comes along, like the Kia that the governor directed here, I think it's very important that we know when to jump and that we have the ability to sell the bonds so that we can actually create jobs and to make this thing work. I know that the Bush scenario has been very successful for Cartersville. A couple of the recommendations, and I may bore you with some of this. The Business Expansion Support Act that basically is an income tax credit for new jobs created. I think if we could get it down to the retail level, even if it's a mom and pop store. I have a terrific couple that own a furniture store, been in the furniture business, retail business for over 35 years. But they, in my estimation, have never really gotten a tax break. Well, if they've been in business and they've employed the same 10 people for about 10 years, why couldn't we give them a break every 10 years or something to maintain that employment base? I'm not suggesting we give away the farm because that would get to be pretty expensive. but we do very little in the state to keep existing business. And I think we need to treat them and thank them for what they've done to the economy of this state over the years, and to continue to grow it. There's also some support due to some people visiting other parts of the country where there's fractional pennies of a sales tax, from a fractional penny up to a full penny, that could be used for specific things like tourism, the arts, various trails, festivals, bike trails, walking trails, whatever it might be. I think there's an opportunity for us to explore that, to see if it works for the state of Georgia, because our tax system certainly is not, as you know, not always conducive to their tax system. The whole thing we're trying to do is to help create jobs and maximize our infrastructure. We've got water and sewer lines in the ground in a lot of cases that are paid for. Now let's maximize the use of those things so that we don't have to invest capital dollars to do it. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to try to push for that possibility. Again, it's just, instead of building out 5 miles to a greenfield, let's see if there's opportunity on top of our existing infrastructure, maybe where our roads, our water and sewer systems might be, that we might be able to do it. There's something called the tax allocation districts. There's something called payment in lieu of taxes. Those are good tools for development. We have some very stringent requirements on those, and I hope at some point we all can take a good, strong look and see if we could relax some of the involvement with those. If the development costs are pure and the development costs are something that we can do that would create jobs, I think it would. It could certainly help create jobs. The one thing I want to support, it's not just state funding we're looking for. It's some local authority and continued flexibility to support business in this state. Right now, we're doing a very interesting study, Mr. Chairman, that I think will be helpful for downtowns. We're working with the Fanning Leadership Institute at the University of Georgia, and we've interviewed about 18 different groups, not any of the typical professionals in the business. We've asked retailers in several cities, what would it take for you to add another store? What would it take for you to build a retail establishment 50 miles from here, or franchise your business? We've talked to bankers about what would you do in the way of financing future expansion of downtown. One of the young bankers that we talked with, who is an executive vice president with one of the larger banks still in Atlanta, he said, I don't want to see one restaurant in the middle of a block that you're asking me to finance. I want you to show me the barber shop, the hairdresser, the hardware store, the small grocer, the whatever that goes along with that one business that you're asking me to support. He said, I want to see the major plan, and how can we build out instead of just picking and choosing 1 and 2 establishments. It's been a fascinating study. Representative Alan Peake helped us one Sunday afternoon where we were asking legislators about some policy changes. What did they see from their perspective about downtown? And yes, sir. As soon as we expect to have the full study done by the 1st of December, and I'd love to share it with you. I will get it to you. Well, I've got the rough draft that we've got. We'll get it to you, and be delighted to do so. And we have growth demands. The next slide, I'm just going to hit them. It's kind of repetitive because what we're trying to do is take care of the infrastructure and the public safety needs. One of the things I want to make you aware of is that the Georgia Municipal Association did not weigh in on the Georgia Environmental Facilities Authority at that time. Now it's the Georgia Environmental Financing Authority. That's a great, great tool for our cities to use to borrow money to expand their water and sewer systems and to build new systems. We stood by it because every day when I talk to one of these ladies and gentlemen that are in the legislature, I ask them to leave us alone and let us spend our money at the city level the way we think is best at that level. No way do I feel like I'm qualified to tell the state how to spend their money. And I didn't feel that way with the GFA assets, and I still feel that way. I discussed it with the majority of my members across the state for 2 years, and they said the same thing, is that's not our place. So if the state knows best how to spend their money, we like to think that we have some idea about doing it locally. I was asked to make a comment about the Department of Revenue. The department is collecting sales tax, local sales tax, and state sales tax. They charge us a 1% fee. It's my understanding they get none of that. It goes to the general fund. It's a department that I'm certain could use some equipment. And if we got this, the department that I think is one of the most critical departments in the state government, that we had the money to give, that they had the money to create a state-of-the-art operation, then it might be helpful. It might only be a one-year deal. It might be a two-year. I'm not sure what the cost would be, but from our perspective, being on the recipient end of the funds, how do we make them better and do that? Compliance and collections are critical. We think there are ways to do it. We've always asked for data to support the check we get or the amount that's deposited in our bank account each month. We'd love to see, okay, where did that come from? Did we have a special event a couple of months ago that created that blip if we got an increase in sales tax? Did we have a decrease? Okay, maybe we didn't have anything going. What's the economic impact of some of the things that we're doing? And we certainly would love to have general data, not specific competitive data, to do that. We've pushed for that for years. We think that we see some of the other states that have very simple one-page forms. I don't know if that's best for us. I don't know if our 6 or 7-page form is the best, but we ask that be looked at to see whether to simplify it for the people who respond. It's very important. If I go buy this pen at a retailer and I pay $1 for it, I know that 4 cents of that should go to the state and 3 cents should go to the local governments. And I think people that don't do that, that's fraud, that's stealing from the state and the local governments, and I think that should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. We'd love to see the turnaround on delivery of our proceeds to be somewhere less than 60 days. We think it would give us sufficient cash flow that we wouldn't have to do tax anticipation notes that cost us money. We think that it would really help because we have to pay basically interest on our tax anticipation notes and all that. Years ago, we used to do something, have a liaison board with the Department of Revenue. Somebody put citizen review panel. I think what we're talking about more is a liaison group that could just share experiences and differences with the department, and they could tell us in turn. Maybe we'd have a better understanding that we could tell our members about what's going on at Department of Revenue and build better trust and relationship with those groups. Finally, I was asked to comment about franchise fees. This is a contractual arrangement between cities and private utility companies. We have 35-year franchise agreements with Georgia Power Company. It's 4% of gross revenues within the city limits. The citizens of the city and the businesses within the city and the manufacturing industry inside the city limits pay about 3% more for their electricity than do the unincorporated area to help satisfy that franchise fee. That was done by the Public Service Commission 3 years ago. The Atlanta Gas Light Corporation, we do something called a demand day charge. It's in lieu of a franchise. They have a demand day because when the markets opened several years ago to open it up to deregulation, they said, well, we can't tell you how much is sold each day within the city, but we can do a demand day charge, and that's picked up by the city residents as well. Bell South, when it was still Bell South, now AT&T, a few years ago we had a franchise agreement that was 3%. It shows up on your telephone bill if you're inside the city limits. It's 3%. It's a franchise fee. They were very proud of the fact that they had a 100-year franchise arrangement with the cities of the state, but about 5 years ago they changed it to a tax. I'm disappointed in that because they are not a taxing entity, but they call it a local tax. It's not. It's a fee. It gives them the ability to be on our right-of-way. All franchise fees are right-of-way access charges, and that's true. If you're in the city limits, you're on public right-of-way, and that was agreed to in 1947 and still remains so today. Ad valorem tax on cable franchise fees. Cable franchise fees are set at 5% by the federal folks. It's not local, and the counties and the cities share in that. They get the 5% as well. We get 5%. Ad valorem tax on automobiles. We have run scenario after scenario for the last 2 years. We can't, depending on which version of the legislation that's out there, it looks like state revenues go up because they get the casual fee on the sale of casual automobiles, the resale. We already get that in property tax on automobiles. So we've got no way to go except down in that scenario. So where they would make, state could realize several hundred million in gains, we would, the best scenario we've run as cities across the state is we could lose about $52 million in 5 years. And that, I don't know where the revenue would be made up from that perspective. Inventory tax, the large manufacturing firms that in the state that are located within cities demand more services and demand more attention. It's a piece of the property tax pie. Joe Citizen that lives over on First Street, you probably don't do anything with him at all during the term of a year, except he comes in and pays his utility bill. But the large industry, they're probably going to get city services and city maintenance people and city activity over there throughout the year. And so the inventory tax is a way to account for that extra treatment that larger industry gets. It's also a great tool for competitive situations with economic development, because we too enjoy Freeport, and we'd love to be able to grow the Freeport to make it better for the citizens of the state and for industry to create jobs. Very briefly, the insurance premium tax that Senator Hudgens talked about first thing, we're very, very dependent on it, on that revenue. If we could find a way to do something different to make up that revenue, then certainly it would be something we should talk to him about. But I don't have a suggestion today, but I wrote it down.
I don't think he was recommending the repeal of the local portion of that.
And I took a big, deep breath when he said that. So, and that's in conclusion, that's about my about long enough for me to bore you today, and I'll try to answer any questions you might have.
Well, Lamar, I'd say that was a pretty fulsome presentation. I'd like to take a few minutes or a couple of minutes if anybody here has questions. I know I have a couple. Yes, Roy.
Would you expand on the ad valorem tax on automobiles and how you're losing the revenue? Why you see a 50 million plus loss of it?
Yes, sir. I'll do my best to explain it. It's currently we have ad valorem tax on automobiles set at a fee determined by the value of that automobile, and it's multiplied basically by the millage rate of the local community. If you replace that with just a flat fee on the casual sale and at a 60-40 split, where the locals would get 60% and the state would get 40%, we lose in that scenario. It takes us about 3 years before we start losing revenue, but we do. And it's the rollback in the ad valorem that cost us. Now, you get it up to about 75-80% local to 20% state, and we both kind of grow at this. But our projections, we grow at about the same rate of income or of revenue.
I didn't get it either. I have a question, and this is a little bit sideways. One of your very fine slides says something about no state money, but give us flexibility to do things the way we want. When you say no state money, what did that mean?
We're not looking for additional state funds to do some things. If we had the flexibility to do a fractional 1 penny sales tax, we could do it.
There are 512 cities. I guess many of them have city school systems. Decatur, you said, was a good one. But we seem to be in the low 40s in the state in education, which is primarily both a shared state and local responsibility.
Right.
And all over this, and it's not our business because we're not dealing with property taxes, all over this state we've heard complaints about property tax administration at the local level. Just to let you know that, I'm not asking you to comment on it because it's not really our purview. But it seems that when the state has to cut its school budget because of budget issues, the property taxes seem to be picking it up. Is that fair or not fair, since most of the property taxes are collected for schools?
The majority of the property tax do go to education at the local level. But at the same time, as much as I hate paying my property tax, my property tax, I live in Fulton County, I actually live in the city of Atlanta, and I have property in 2 other places in the state. And in the city of Atlanta, Fulton County, my taxes have been reflective over the last 5 years of the market, of the assessed value in this state, certainly in Fulton County in the city of Atlanta. My taxes actually went down this year. And my assessed value has gone down 2 years in a row, tremendously, as a matter of fact, which is very sad. Now, that doesn't get to the point that you asked, but although I hate property tax, I think it's a good thing because of that really, really harsh feeling about property taxes. Local elected officials are very sensitive. It may not seem that way, but I will assure you that city officials are, before they raise the millage rate or before that they are willing to accept an assessment increase that I've heard called a backdoor tax increase. But I would tell you that it's pretty open. That process is pretty open. But we do our best not to have to raise property taxes. Now, funding for education, I'm sure that someone in the education community could give you a much better scenario of that than I could.
Brought that up. It seems also that your constituents favor the ability to tax themselves in the sales tax area.
They have interest in having that option. Right now, I've talked with several of our mayors, and I'll throw out a couple of examples if that's okay. City of Fayetteville talked with a mayor, and he said, although if I had a 1 penny sales tax based upon what we think we're raising in sales tax inside the city limits of Fayetteville, I could roll back the city property tax and probably lower fees across the state, across the city with that 1 cent sales tax. He said, given that opportunity, would I call that sales tax now? And the answer is no, I would not, because I think the citizens would not vote for it now. I think they're opposed to any increase or anything that looks like an increase in taxes, and we would not do that. Likewise, I think it is indicative of the transportation sales tax that's going to come up in 2012. I think unless something really changes, it's going to have a difficult time, according to our members, in passing because it looks like a tax increase.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation. It's time for a break. Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah. No.
Okay, thank you all for, don't you all have anything better to do than sit through these never-ending hearings? Oh, it's unbelievable. Just remember, we're not getting paid to do it either. Our next speaker is here under remarkably wonderful circumstances, and you need to give him a round of applause for this. I think last night, his spouse gave birth to a baby girl. What are you doing here?
I'm just running on pure adrenaline today.
Well, we won't hold it against you if you shorten your speech. As the legislative director for the Association of County Commissioners in Georgia, Clint plays an essential role in liaising between counties and the state. He's had a lot of experience on this. He authored the Association of County Commissioners Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax Bill Guide. For those of you who are not among the cognoscenti, that's called a SPLOST. I had to learn it too. He's worked with the Public Safety and Revenue chapters of the County Commissioners Handbook. He's written those. He's an accomplished author. He's written extensively on property taxes. Before serving as ACCG's legislative director, he served as Assistant Director of Finance and Management Services. He's been involved in special purpose local option sales tax, tax allocation districts, forest land protection, brownfield remediation, cable franchise reform, and enhanced 911, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This year, Clint helped to pass legislation to reform Georgia's property tax system. Best I can tell you, got a little bit more to go. And legislation to improve sales tax collection. He went to Georgia Southern, has a master's in public administration from the University of Georgia, and is a talented and committed public servant. Clint Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Tax Council. I appreciate you having me here today. I look forward to the opportunity to share with you a little bit about county government, the service that we provide at the county level of government, and some of the revenues that we utilize to provide those services. I'm going to got a lot of ground to cover here in 20 minutes, so buckle up. I apologize in advance because I'm going to be hitting a number of topics that I've been asked to hit in a short period of time. Go ahead. Most of you are familiar with Georgia's counties. We cover every square inch of the state. We've got 159 counties, second most to the state of Texas, so we have a lot of local government in this state. We believe greatly in local government. We are a political subdivision of the state of Georgia. We are constitutionally created, and we basically serve as the local arm of state government, if you will. You think about the state of Georgia and the services they provide. We share a lot of those services. We're the ones that they turn to when they want to provide those services more locally. Next slide. You've probably heard a lot about this in your deliberations. Everybody wants a piece of the pie. Everybody is looking for a piece of the revenue stream. And at the county level, we do a lot of things. Most people aren't even familiar with all the things that county governments do. We obviously are running the court systems. We provide a lot of joint services with the state, such as your public health departments, your libraries, many others. In addition to all those state-type services, we're also providing quite a few services that cities provide, but we're providing those services in the unincorporated area. We have a lot of unincorporated areas of the state that have become very urbanized. Look just in the metro Atlanta region. Most of the people that live in this region actually are living in the unincorporated areas of Cobb, DeKalb, Fulton, well, used to be Fulton, and Gwinnett. Next slide. County government revenues. We have a pretty diverse revenue stream at the county level of government. Obviously, property taxes is our #1 revenue source. We rely most heavily on that, although not quite as heavily as the schools do. Sales taxes are #2 revenue source in general. And then we have a host of different excise taxes, license and permits, and service charges. Next slide. This is a graph, gives you just a little bit of a sense of how the pie is broken up. As Lamar said earlier, this is just average statewide. This does vary considerably from county to county, but on average, about 38% of our budget revenues come from property taxes, and about 22% comes from sales taxes. And then fees and excise taxes make up the rest. Next slide. This tells you, and again, I know that this council is not specifically looking at property taxes, but I've been asked just to hit on a couple of the property tax administrative issues today, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to talk mostly about the evaluation and appeals process. But as you can see by this pie chart, most of the property taxes that we generate is coming from real and personal property, but then we do have other types of property taxes such as railroad equipment, mobile homes, utilities, and other things like that. Next slide, please. So evaluation and appeals. There was a study committee hosted by the Senate a little over about this time last year, and they looked at the whole property tax system, but in particular they were looking at how we value property for assessment purposes? And also, what is the appeals mechanism that property owners have when they disagree with those valuations? And that resulted in Senate Bill 346 that was passed this session. And I'm not going to go through, obviously, all of that. It made a considerable amount of changes to the system. And I know that it was mentioned earlier that there needs to be more changes made, but I will tell you that most of the changes that were made in 346, in fact 95% of them, won't kick in until January 1 of 2011. So we haven't had a chance to try these things out yet. But as of January 1 of next year, we will come under these new changes. And I put in your folder, I believe, a one-page flow chart that shows you the new appeals process that will begin starting January 1, 2011. And there's quite a number of new appeal options that property owners have not had in the past. If you'll back up one slide real quick. Okay. I'm not going to go through calculating the tax bill. You all, I think, are familiar with that. I will tell you that it's kind of strange that we value property at 40% of its fair market, or we assess property, excuse me, at 40% of its fair market value. And I'm not going to go into the history of that. There is a story behind that. But, you know, why don't we just value it at 100% of its fair market value and lower the millage rate? We also use the millage rate, which most people don't understand what the millage rate is. It's $1 per thousand worth of assessed value. So we have a system that is not real easy to understand by the average citizen. And then on top of those calculations, we throw in numerous types of exemptions. Some of these exemptions are created locally. Some of these exemptions are created at the state level and applied to all 159 counties. So it depends on where you're located at in a particular county, in a particular city, as to what your range of exemption options are. And most people don't even know how to take advantage of all the exemptions that they have available to them. We also have had credits in the past. We don't currently, the last one we had was the HTRG grant credit that is not currently in place, but that's tacked on to the back end of the tax bill. So when you get your tax bill, in fact, I got mine today in the mail, which I wasn't real pleased with it. But when you start looking at that tax bill, it's really hard for the average citizen to understand how that thing is calculated. And then you've got all the different levying authorities. You got the schools, which make up the bulk of it, and then you got the counties and the cities and special service districts and bond millage levies and all these other things. And so it is very confusing to the average taxpayer to make sense of it. We do operate under the DOR. They do all our training for our tax assessor's office and our tax commissioner's office. So the county government really houses the administration of the property tax system. And they do, again, not only the training, but they have a property appraisal procedures manual that we go by. So again, I know people complain about uniformity across the state and different counties doing it different ways, but we're attempting through this manual to try to get some uniformity across the state. Sales ratio study. This is an important point because a lot of people don't realize this. People tell me all the time, well, you know, counties, you have to revalue your property every 3 years or whatever it is. Actually, there's no law in the state of Georgia that requires counties to ever revalue their property. They do not have to revalue their property. Now, a lot of them will revalue their property because every 3 years the Department of Revenue is going to look at them, and if they fall out of compliance with this sales ratio study, then they get hit with penalties. And that could be up to a $5 per parcel penalty. So that gets pretty significant. So that's really what forces local governments to revalue property, is when they start getting out of compliance with sales ratio, hit with the penalties, and they say, hey, we can't afford, or the taxpayers can't afford to pay these penalties, so let's revalue the property. Let's do a countywide revaluation. Now, a lot of counties don't revalue all their property every year. They'll do like a third, or they'll do a portion of it. Of course, some people complain that maybe value one area of the county multiple times before they get around to a different area, and that does happen, I'll tell you, but that's due to some of the high growth areas of the county. So again, just want to make sure you're real clear that there is nothing in state law that forces us to revalue property on any time schedule. Recent changes to the appeals process, again, that's what that flow chart's for. If you have any questions about it later, I'd be glad to answer that. Next slide. Business incentives. I know this committee is very interested in what we're doing to try to incentivize economic development in businesses. Under the property tax system, there's a number of tools that we have, and some of them have been fairly effective. When it comes to agriculture, the first bullet point, those three, significant incentives for agriculture. We got the ag preferential, the conservation use assessment, and the Forest Land Protection Act, which was recently passed, that allows basically any timber corporation that has over 200 acres of timberland to put it in to a 15-year covenant and get a substantial reduction in the assessed value of that property, which dramatically lowers their tax bill. CUVA is a 10-year covenant. I know we've got Richard Roll in the audience back here, who's the grandfather of both of those, and I work with him on the forest land. But that is a significant incentive to agriculture to try to keep that property in a conservation state. So again, we're not just saying keep it in a conservation state, we're saying you have to put it in a covenant, and if you breach that covenant, there's significant penalties that they have to pay. Freeport's been mentioned here today. Freeport is a program that's sort of a county-by-county program. In fact, if you would go to the next slide real quick, and then we're going to back up. This is a slide that I got from the Department of Economic Development that shows the counties across the state, and to the extent that they use Freeport. The lighter color is full Freeport exemption. They basically give 100% exemption. The darker green is a partial Freeport exemption, and there's brackets. They can give a 20%, a 40%, or 60%. And again, it's up to the local governments to make that decision, and they have to have that voted on with a local referendum. And then we've got a few that have no Freeport, but not many. Now, how does Freeport tie in with business inventory? Freeport is a type of business inventory. It's the inventory used mainly when it's held for manufactured goods, or that's held in warehouses, distribution warehouses, for products that's being sent out of state, those kinds of things. It doesn't capture all business inventory, though, and I think that's been talked about here a little bit. To capture all business inventory, to get the rest of it, based on some numbers I got from the Department of Revenue that are about 4 or 5 years old, looks like it would be about $230 million to local government collectively across the state. So that's county, city, and school. That would be the collective impact statewide. And again, I don't have the current numbers. I tried to get them before I got here, but I apologize about that. So that's about the magnitude of what's left in that business inventory pot. But that would be things like, you know, your Walmart store. I think the thing you got to look at there's a definite compelling reason why we give Freeport to attract manufacturing type businesses. Retail, if you exempt their inventory, will they move? You know, I don't necessarily think that that's going to cause them to move locations. Maybe if they're right on the border with another state. But I do understand that when businesses look at our other neighbors in the Southeast and see that they don't have any business inventory, again, like it's been mentioned here before, it's sort of low-hanging fruit. Why do they don't have it, so why should we? Next. Sales tax. This is our main revenue source that we partner with the state on. We share the tax base for this tax, and this is a very significant revenue source for us. We have a number of local option sales tax in the state of Georgia. Lost, which is used to roll back property taxes. We've got 147 counties that have this, and it's shared with the cities. We've got 8 counties that have it, but it all goes to the school system to roll back their property tax. It was done through local constitutional amendments back when those were legal. And then we've got Towns County that has a county lost and an e-lost. So they've got a school and a county lost. And then, as mentioned earlier, Muskogee County has 2 lost, and that's something recent. In special purpose local option sales tax, we've got about 151 counties in the state currently that have the SPLOS. This has been a really great tool, and I'm going to talk more about that in a second. And then we have the homestead option sales tax, which only 2 counties have adopted this. That's Rockdale and DeKalb County, and that's kind of a hybrid. 80% of it has to be used to roll back homesteaded property taxes, unlike lost up there, which is used to roll back all property taxes. This one targets just homesteaded. And then the remaining 20%, or up to a maximum of 20%, can be used for additional capital expenditures that they have. I'll tell you, though, that DeKalb right now is using about 98% of it for the rollback, just because they promised that they were going to give 100% rollback at the time, and it's costing them more and more to give that rollback. In addition, these are the county ones, but in addition to these, obviously, we've got the MARTA sales tax at the local level. We've got the Atlanta Water Sewer sales tax. Of course, we've got this regional transportation sales tax that's coming up for a vote in 2012. So we've got a number of local options. And I would say that most of our counties feel like that they would like more flexibility to be able to sort of choose. Right now, we basically at the county level have a cap. We can't have more than 2 pennies at the county level. So that's R2, the school's penny, and then the state's 4. They would like to be able to pick and choose. So they may want to do 2 lost instead of a lost and a splost. Or they may want to do 2 splost, or they may want to do a lost and a host. But they don't have that flexibility under current law to do that, and they'd like to have that. Next slide. Infrastructure, we've heard a lot about that. That's critical to growth in this state, providing water and sewer and roads. And that's where we get most of our money for providing infrastructure. SPLOST by far is our major revenue source for infrastructure. In fact, since 2004, when we started collecting data on this, we've spent about $3.5 billion on road, street, and bridge projects under SPLOST. The SPLOST, by the way, has about a 96.8% pass rate. That's since 2004, so it's very popular with the voters. For water and sewer projects, out of the last 610 SPLOST, 320 of them have contained water and sewer projects. For road, street, and bridge, 437 of the last 610. So we use it extensively for infrastructure. One thing that we'd like to see the legislature change when it comes to SPLOST in particular is sometimes these SPLOST are put into place and voted on by the voters that live there, and a need arises to change those projects down the road. And there is no mechanism under current law to change projects. I'll give you an example. We had a county that called me up and said, look, we put money in a SPLOST for building a new jail. Well, we've determined it's not cost effective now to build a new jail. It's cheaper for us to house our inmates in a neighboring county. Well, they can't really spend that money that's been set aside for that jail for anything else. And there is no mechanism for them to go back and redirect that money. So we've got lots of pots of money, SPLOST money, that's sitting out there that's just, it can't be used. I tell you, some of the SPLOST money's 10, 15, 20 years old. It's been sitting there, just earning interest sitting in an account. So one thing we'd like to see the legislature do is allow us, in a future referendum, subject to voter approval, allow us to redirect. So in that case of the jail, maybe they want to spend it on road, street, and bridge projects now, that they could go to the voters on their next SPLOST referendum and say, hey, we've got $1 million sitting in a SPLOST account from 1994, and we'd like to free that money up because we don't want to do the jail anymore and use it for road, street, and bridge. And if we put that on the ballot and the voters in that county said, yes, we agree, and we think we need to use those tax dollars that we've collected, then we ought to be able to redirect those funds. Again, only subject to voter approval. I'm not going to talk about the regional transportation sales tax. There's a whole lot of discussion going on across the state about that right now. Obviously, we've been doing what we can at ACCG to get out there and promote that. We hope that it passes in all 12 regions across the state. We know how badly needed additional revenue is for transportation, but it truly is an uphill battle when you try to get that many people on board. Next slide. Partnering with the state to improve the sales tax system. We believe in expanding the base, broad base, low rate. We think that's a good policy. I mentioned flexibility to select among local option sales taxes. Something we're doing right now under House Bill 1093 that passed this year is we're matching, starting hopefully next year, January 1 of next year, we're going to start trying to match our business occupation tax information against the sales tax registration data to try to figure out if there are people that are reporting at the state level that aren't at the local level. Or at the local level and not the state level. So we'll be sending that information to the state because we have the people on the ground out there in the community that can actually go into these businesses to see, are they doing something that requires them to be collecting sales tax? It may be a hair salon that says we don't need to collect sales tax, but we go in there and see they're actually selling shampoo and they do need to be collecting sales tax, but they have told us when they come to register for business occupation tax that they didn't need a sales tax ID. We'll be able to then monitor that. And also our business occupation taxes, we have to renew those annually, where once you register for sales taxes, you're basically done. So we'll be able to check these things on an annual basis. So we're hoping by partnering with the state, we're going to be able to, and this is an important tax policy principle, minimize the tax gap. I think that ensuring that we get better compliance out there, that's money that's not being paid, and it's also an unfair competitive advantage that the people that aren't paying it have over the businesses that are paying it. So anything we can do to minimize that tax gap, ACCG is very much in favor of. Point of sale. This is something that comes up all the time out there in the newspaper, and I just want to clarify this. Point of sale, when you use that term, you're talking about the situs of sale. In Georgia, we are not a point of sale state. We are a point of destination state. Now, there's some subtle differences in there. The best way to explain it is, if you go to Home Depot to pick up lumber to build a barn, you're going to pay the sales tax to the county and jurisdiction where you picked up the lumber at that Home Depot. If Home Depot, though, delivers that product out to your job site and you don't live in the county where the Home Depot is, then that sales tax should be going to the county where the job site is because they delivered it out there. You took receipt of it in a different county. Again, it's most of the time people pick it up where they buy it, but we are not a point of sale state, and we've never advocated to go. There are other states that are point of sale states, but we're a point of destination, and we like that. I think what people mean by point of sale really is just making sure that the sales taxes get collected and go back to the right jurisdiction. So I think when you hear that term come up in Georgia, that's really what people are talking about, not what it truly is, which is about the situs of the sale. Unidentifiable sales tax. We have a formula in law that allows the Department of Revenue to distribute to all local governments across the state any sales tax where they can't identify who it belongs to, and it's on a pro rata basis. That formula sunsets next year. We already had to renew it a few years ago, but we sunsetted it again. We think that it works. Nobody complains about it. We just need to remove the sunset and let that thing continue indefinitely. So that would be to remove the sunset on the distribution formula for dispersing unidentifiable sales tax. National Streamline. This is a very important issue, and we passed legislation this year, House Bill 1221, that hopefully is going to get us most of the way there, if not all the way there, but we haven't made application yet to National Streamline. That's something that I think the Department of Revenue is in the process of doing right now. But this is something to watch. We need to make sure that we become a full member of National Streamline, because what that does in the future is allows us, whenever Congress takes action, to make sure that out-of-state businesses that don't have nexus in the state collect our sales tax. And then before Congress takes action, it allows us to get some voluntary compliance from national retailers that have already joined this. And there's a couple items, and most of them relate to fuel, that may keep us from being in full compliance right now. We're looking into that right now. We're hoping that Streamline will make some exemptions, but if they don't, this may be something we have to come back to the legislature to finish and finish addressing. House Bill 480, I think Lamar mentioned this one. This is a bill that's come up for the past 2 years. I think it's a great idea, actually, that you do away with sales tax on vehicles, you do away with property taxes on vehicles, you make it real simple. When people go to register their vehicle, they pay a title, it's not register, excuse me, when they title their vehicle, they pay a title transfer tax. It's a lot simpler. I think the only issue for us is just making sure that long term we're able to replace the lost revenues. I think that we'll definitely be able to, based on the numbers that I've seen, I know Dr. Shokowitz, you've done a lot of research in this area, we'll be able to replace the revenues for the first 5-6 years of this program. It's questionable, though, whether we'll be able to replace the revenues year 7, 8, 9 on out, because the way this works is the property tax piece of it phases out over time as people sell their vehicles and there's no more property taxes. So that's something, though, to look at. Next slide. Excise and special use taxes. This is probably our third largest item in the revenue pool. Next slide. I'm going to touch on just a couple of them. Utility taxes in particular. As was mentioned earlier, franchise fees. This is a system that's very old, and the counties collect cable franchise fees, and that's the only one. Cities have franchise fees on telecom, gas, electricity, all those utilities, and I'm not going to get into the history of that. There is a good reason why that's the case. But today, most people will tell you, what do you do with these franchise fees? What's the purpose of them? Most people will say, hey, it's to help maintain our right-of-ways. It's the cost of maintaining those rights-of-way. Well, the way the current system's set up, it really doesn't do that. The current franchise fee system, the franchise fees go into the general fund of the county or the city, and they can be used for anything under the sun. They're not restricted at all. In fact, the unincorporated residents embedded in their utility rates pay a franchise fee. Again, it's not broken out on their bill, except in some cases, like I think AT&T started breaking theirs out on their bill. But they pay an embedded fee that goes to the city. So if you're in the unincorporated area of a county, you could be paying a franchise fee that goes to a city, to somebody that you didn't vote for, and for a government jurisdiction that you don't live in. Now, some of that was mitigated a few years ago by the PSC. That was a case that we had before the PSC with Georgia Power. They basically cut it in half. But that was just with Georgia Power. And again, as I mentioned, AT&T has done it voluntarily, has changed this. So the utilities can, I think, do this voluntarily if they want. In other words, not charge the unincorporated residents the city franchise fee, but a lot of them still are doing that. I think that a better system may be to look at moving away from the franchise fee system completely and moving to maybe a right-of-way occupancy fee. Again, this fee would be based on the amount of infrastructure the utilities have in our rights-of-way. And the revenues derived off this would be used for maintaining that right-of-way, repairing the right-of-way, buying new right-of-way. A lot of times when we change our, add capacity to our roads or change intersections, we have to move utilities on our rights of way, and that's very costly. The taxpayers have to pay to move those utilities. So this would be a way of paying for that instead of having to go back to the property taxpayer. So any costs associated with maintaining those rights of way, we think there should be a dedicated fee. In other words, not just dump it in the general fund and do whatever you want with it, but give a return back to who's paying the fee, which is the utility companies. Telecom excise tax has been used in a lot of other states. Again, it's simplification of the taxes that telecom companies pay because, quite frankly, you can get your TV service through a satellite, you can get it through a cable line, you can get it through a phone line, you can get it through 4 or 5 different technology platforms, but they're all taxed differently. Why is that? They have to compete with each other. You and I, when we're watching our TV, we don't care how we get the signal as long as we get a good signal. So we need to look at what other states have done. They've moved away. They basically bundled a lot of these taxes on telecom into a telecom excise tax and done away with them. And that way, everybody's sort of playing on the same playing field. Next slide. Taxpayer transparency. I think this was something I didn't see in your basic principles of good tax policy, and I would encourage you to make this one of those principles. I think it's critical that the taxpayers see the relationship between what they pay and what's being done with that money. The taxes are transparent, that they're not hidden. I mentioned the franchise fee. How many unincorporated residents right now know that embedded in their utility bill they're paying a city franchise fee? I bet none. That's not transparent.
We've actually heard some of that on our tours around the state, so we're making it very
Right. Some other areas where transparency is needed, we've got a lot of fees that have been set out in state law for specific purposes, and they're not going to those purposes. When people pay that $1 scrap tire fee, they don't know that it's not going there. When people pay that 911 fee, they don't know it's not going to 911 on prepaid phones. These fees are being redirected to other things. That's not a fee anymore, guys. That's a tax. We've turned a fee into a tax. If there are fees, then they need to go for whatever the purpose that has been stated in state law that they're to be used for. So I'd encourage you to look at, I know that fees is not really in your purview, but taxes are. And I'm making the argument that these fees have become taxes because they don't go to the purpose that the General Assembly established originally. So any of those fees, either utilize them for the intended purpose or just do away with them. If you're going to charge somebody a fee and you're not using it for what you told them you're going to use it for, then don't charge them a fee at all. Disclosing the tax shift. This is important too. We have all these referendums on different exemptions. People don't really know what they're voting on. I tell people all the time, I said, if you're not part of the exempt class, vote against it because you're going to be the one picking up the tab. But too many people, they don't understand what the cost of these exemptions are, and they don't understand who's going to pay for these exemptions. Is it going to be made up through a cut in services to government, or is it going to be made up by all the other taxpayers paying more? I think when we tell people to vote on these things, we need to give them a little bit more information just about what the cost is and who's going to pick up that cost. Disclosing the full cost of capital. Quite frankly, capital's great, guys, but there's an operating component to capital. This pertains to SPLOST. Too many times we tell voters, hey, vote for this project. Oh, it's a wonderful new swimming pool. We don't tell them, by the way, to operate that swimming pool and hire staff, we're going to have to find another $10 million a year, and that may be coming out of your property taxes, so we may have to raise property taxes to do that. We don't disclose that. Again, back to transparency, there's more to building capital projects than just building the project. There's the more important cost, which is the ongoing cost, long-term cost of maintaining that capital asset and staffing that capital asset. So I think we need to, again, give more information to these voters that are voting on these referendums and other things that, hey, it's not just the capital. And I know I've taken more than enough time, so I'm going to stop there and be glad to answer any questions that y'all have.
You know, I'd hate to see you on a good night's sleep. Questions, anyone?
I have one.
Yes, Brad.
Does every business activity, whether incorporated or not, are they required to have a business license or file the occupancy return?
No, the business occupation tax is optional for the county or the city. We have actually probably the majority of counties in the state that don't charge a business occupation tax. So most of the cities do, but it is optional. One thing we're talking about, though, so we can match this data with the Department of Revenue, is encouraging them to charge a nominal business occupation tax. So they can, if they want to, if they choose to, they can charge just enough to cover the cost of administering that without actually generating any revenue to operate their government. And that would at least sort of create a system where we're registering these businesses.
Do you have a sense for how many businesses are now not registered or in the system in any county or city?
I don't. That's something we're going to be looking at as this project moves forward. We did a pilot project with a few counties across the state. The one that got the farthest was Hall County. You probably read about that in the paper. And they found a substantial number of businesses that were registered at the state level and not at the local level or vice versa. A lot of them were smaller businesses, which most people would think that's the case. Although there's a study going on right now in Gwinnett County by CH2M Hill, and they went to the Mall of Georgia. You probably read about this. But about half the businesses had not registered to pay business occupation taxes. And we're talking about the big stores like Macy's that hadn't registered. I'm sure it was just an oversight by somebody, but you wonder if the stores that are that visible at the Mall of Georgia haven't registered for business occupation taxes, how many others that are the small mom and pops that just haven't done it?
It's not local taxes, right? No, it's city and local.
I'm, on the last slide that you had, in those aspects of transparency for the taxpayer and so on, I'm very sympathetic to those, but those are all really complicated, and especially when you're talking about separate governments, for the governments to keep up with that, to follow that kind of information path and so on. A number of the think tanks that I've been talking to strongly recommend a commission staffed by public servants that would review any tax change and serve as an adjunct to the legislature, I guess. And those kinds of issues could be reviewed by a commission like that, not this council, not this one.
Thank you.
Another one. And I wonder if you've heard of that or thought of that, or whether you think something like that would take care of those important issues.
I do think that tax decisions are very important. In fact, you may not be familiar, but in the legislature, retirement bills have to be introduced in the first year of the biennial, but then have to lay over and aren't actually passed until the second year of the biennial. Why aren't we doing that with tax bills? I really think that we ought to have to introduce the tax bills the first year, let them lay over 1 year, which would give us that time that you're talking about, because you can't study this stuff at the General Assembly. It's fast and furious, and there's just not enough time. But we could then, in the interim, put together some sort of a body that really had in-depth knowledge about the tax structure to review them, and then come back the next year and make a decision whether the General Assembly wants to pass them or not. So treat them like retirement bills is what I would suggest.
Well, and I just did want to say that the think tanks that I've been talking to, that's like third on their list of recommendations of important tax reform items. So
That's
Good point.
You say it's important. That was great. Now I want to go back to your first or second slide. What do you mean by expand the base?
Well, I was talking in particular the sales tax base. I think that with this regional transportation tax, we're looking at a possibility of 8 cents if that passes in a lot of areas of the state, 9 cents in Atlanta. I think that we're getting to a point where you look at our southeastern neighbors, we can only go so high as far as rate, and then we'll just start crowding out what's there. So quite frankly, that's what I'm hearing across the state. Our folks are all for the regional transportation tax if it doesn't keep them from being able to pass their SPLOST. They're real concerned that if the regional tax passes, that they may not be able to come back and pass their local SPLOST, and they favor their local SPLOST even to a greater extent than the regional. So I don't know that we can keep going up on rates. I think we have to look at the base. And when I say expanding the base, I'm talking looking at the exemptions, which I know you all are doing, and then looking at different services that aren't taxed. And I think when you look at services, you got to be very careful. I think with services, you got to look at those that are really like geographically based, where people aren't going to move their business out of state. Obviously, it's easy to do that on things like haircuts and gym memberships, because you're not going to drive across state lines to go do those things. But when you get into legal services, accounting services, and those things, you got to be real careful. But I think you all are looking at both services and the exemptions, and I think we support you fully in that.
David, don't say it.
Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead and say it.
Clint, congratulations on the birth.
Thank you.
talking about property taxes, one of the things we've heard in the various fact-finding sessions and elected officials here all the time is concern about the magnitude of the property tax. From a local government perspective, how would you approach reducing your reliance on the property tax?
Well, there's two things. You can look at the revenue side or the expenditure side. I'll address both. From the revenue side, obviously, we have a lot of counties that are interested in moving away from property taxes and charging more fees for services that we provide. Now, you can do that to an extent. One of the problems, though, with moving to fees, and we've had some counties that have attempted to do it for like public safety type services, is the collection of those fees. We don't really have in state law right now a legal structure that allows us to keep our compliance rates high with fees. In other words, let's take the garbage fee. We can put that on the property tax bill and collect it under state law like we do property taxes. And when you put it on the garbage fee on the property tax bill, it gets collected. But if you're not able to enforce it through some of those same mechanisms, then the tax gap gets wide and we only collect 60% of it, 70% of it. So I think if you're going to migrate more towards fees, away from property taxes, then we've got to go back into state law and make sure that we've got a legal structure that allows us to easily collect those fees without spending a lot of money. It gives us the legal enforcement tools to do that. Also, sales tax, obviously a lot of our members favor sales tax, so expanding the sales tax base would again help us reduce our reliance on property taxes. In particular, if we expand the sales tax base, then we're able to generate more from our lost penny, and that penny is used to roll back property taxes, unlike SPLOST. It's supposed to be a dollar for dollar rollback against property taxes. On the expenditure side of the equation, at the county level, we have to provide a lot of services that we don't choose to provide. The state says you will provide them. The Constitution says you will provide them. So we deal with constitutional officers, sheriffs, probate judge, superior court clerk, tax commissioner. We control the millage rate setting, but we have no control over their budgets. And we can set the amount of money that they get, but they can come back and sue us and have successfully sued us many times, saying we don't give us enough to fulfill our constitutional obligations. So that structure is difficult because you got one body that's answerable, that has to answer to the taxpayer for setting the millage rate, another body that has to answer to the taxpayer for providing great services. So they view their role, hey, I got to provide great services. Got to, never spend enough on law enforcement. Got to make people safe. The county commissioners over there saying, yeah, but there's a cost to that. And I got to raise that through millage rates. There's that disconnect because of the legal structure we have in Georgia. We can't tell them how to run their office or where to make cuts. So I'm having this problem across the state right now where a lot of counties are furloughing employees and they're doing across-the-board cuts of, say, 5%, and the sheriff's coming in or the other constitutional officers are coming in and saying, we're not going to take that cut. You can do it to your other departments, but you're not going to do it to the constitutional offices. And we could be faced going to court and actually spending tax dollars on both sides of that legal fight to try to work that out.
I'm not sure quite where to go with that.
I was hoping there's no sheriffs in the office because I was treading on dangerous ground there when I'm talking about the sheriffs because they are much more powerful, I'll admit, than the county commissioners.
Yeah, I'm not going to touch it either at all. We've heard throughout the state and at these meetings about expanding the base, lower the rate. You've mentioned services. We happen to have been through an exhaustive look at every service provided in this state by 5-digit NAIC code or whatever. We already tax a fair number of services, as you know.
Right.
When we look at those that we don't now tax, that you obviously wouldn't say health care or legal services, you have to wonder whether there's enough expanding the base to really matter,
There's not as much as people would like to think, for sure.
Precisely. Are there any other ideas you have on consumption taxes that could expand the base?
I really don't want to get into talking about VAT taxes and things like that, but I don't know. That's a good question. I have not really looked into sort of truly outside of the box things that we're talking about, things that we do in Georgia and changing the things that we do, but things that we have never even considered in Georgia.
Taxes on consumption. Where are we not taxing consumption that we ought to be?
I think we are doing a pretty good job of taxing consumption across the board. I guess the question is, are we taxing it enough? I can't think of too many areas where we are consuming that we're not taxing it, at least to some extent. I mean, I hear from our members all the time that they'd like to see motor fuel taxes increased and use that to pay for roads. But there's problems with that, because as we get more fuel-efficient vehicles, that'll never keep up, I don't think, with where we're heading in this country as far as, especially when you talk about a tax per gallon. Now changing that from a cent per gallon to a percent would generate more revenue. So basically, take the motor fuel tax that we have in the state of Georgia and convert it to, in a sense, a sales tax. I think that would do a better job of keeping up. Without changing the rate, you would do a better job of keeping up with inflation.
The other side of that, of course, is that it fluctuates with the price of gas.
Yes, it
And
could go up or down.
That's an unhealthy covariance.
It's much more volatile, you're correct.
Chairman, I got a question.
Yes, sir, please.
You had mentioned compliance as being one of the key components, I suppose. What is your membership's experience on compliance? And I'd say probably sales tax would be the one that would be the biggest problem. How do they deal with that? How would you recommend dealing with the compliance issues, and where do you see the big problem?
One area that I think is helpful, and you've, I'm sure, heard this before, if we can move it up the food chain, in other words, for motor fuel, we moved it to the wholesale level, and we heard that we were able to capture a lot of revenue that was going uncollected at the retail level because of that. The next level would be move it up to the rack level. So can you move those collections so you're dealing with a more limited scope of collector, and you're able to then audit them more? Again, I think auditing is another key provision, and the Department of Revenue, I know, is staffing up right now to start providing additional audits, but we audit probably less sales tax accounts than any other state, at least in the Southeast. We know we've got to do a better job of doing audits, because it truly becomes a voluntary system if people feel like they're never going to get audited. So we've got to really show that we're not just going to audit the Walmarts, but we can audit down to the smaller levels of stores. So getting out there and putting that thread out there, and I think that's why you've seen recently the Department of Revenue is actually highlighting in the press a little bit more when they're closing down businesses and things like that, because they want to make sure that people are realizing across the state that, hey, we are going to go out there and audit you.
Clint, thanks a million.
Sure.
This is a great presentation. We appreciate your being here. We're going to have a Representative Stacey Abrams. Hey, welcome. Thank you for coming. Now can you hear me? Stacey Abrams, now you get maybe heard. We've got a panel who I want to get up here really quickly. We may run over a few minutes, but we're going to try to get it going right now. One of the things we don't know a lot about and need to know more about is emerging industries, the things that we talk about being the 21st century types of opportunities that didn't exist before, either because of electronics or science or whatever. So we've asked several people who are experts in this to come and be on a panel, which I will moderate here in just a moment. So with Tino and Carter and Carol and Danny, please come up and grab a seat on the stage. And while they're coming up, I'll tell you who they are. Carter Burton is president of Spine 360, a medical device original equipment manufacturer. There's a huge and growing medical device segment, and he can tell you more about it when he's there. And he has been actively involved in bringing those businesses to Georgia, working with the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce and the Bioscience Leadership Council. He had his MBA from Kellogg, my favorite, and master's degree from engineering management from Northwestern. Carter, where are you? Good to see you. Tino Mantella, I've known for a long time. He's president of Technology Associates of Georgia, which he joined in 2004 to be the organization's president. He is Since coming to TAG, he has worked with a team of dedicated volunteers and staff to build a prestigious board on 48 technology stakeholders, of 40 technology stakeholders, growing membership by more than 20% and adding a series of programs and services to support TAG's vision of educating and informing the community about technology. He's also a member of the Northwestern University Kellogg Board. I didn't mean to do that to everybody. Did you go there too?
No, it was on the board though.
Oh, yeah, okay. You go to a football school? Carol Henderson. Carol is director of the Business Enterprise Division of the Georgia Department of Economic Development, which, by the way, has been extremely helpful to us in fact-finding. She's director of Health Sciences, Advanced Technologies, and Interactive Entertainment in the Business Enterprise Division of GE, Georgia Department of Economic Development. She heads a team that's tasked, and boy, we're going to ask you about this, with identifying and recruiting innovation-based companies to the state and assisting existing strategic industry-based studies. We're anxious to hear from you. Thank you. All right, let's start. Danny, I'm so sorry. You're not going to get away with this. Danny Groves.
Yes, sir.
There you go. Thank you. Currently serves as Director of Taxation for Internet Network Services Corporation, the subsidiary is a publicly traded company. He's headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. He's been in public accounting. He is involved in network services and data centers, and is here to tell us about that aspect of our business. He's got his master's in taxation and bachelor's in business administration from Georgia State. He's an Atlanta native, and we're glad you're here. And I didn't mean to leave you out. You're caught between two Northwestern guys. I'm going to ask this question to the panel and ask you to give sort of a 10-second response. Of all the businesses that you are associated with, how important is the tax code of Georgia in a relative sense, relative to other factors, quality of life, education, you name it, K-12, roads and bridges, et cetera? Where would you rank tax policy or Georgia taxation as a contributor or detractor from expansion of your businesses, the businesses you represent? I'll start with you.
Expansion in Georgia, I assume you mean. Is that right?
Yeah.
Expansion in Georgia.
We don't really care about Alabama in this meeting.
What about Texas?
Not a chance.
So in my business, as Mr. Frazier indicated, I'm in the medical device business, and we do pedicle screws, things for spinal fusions. So the types of folks that we employ are design engineers, lots of salespeople. They're sort of smaller jobs that are sort of shipping and receiving kind of things, but it's a very intellectual property driven business, and it has a very decentralized employment base, which is predominantly in Texas, why I mentioned that. So growth in Georgia, the business is growing very rapidly. Growth in Georgia, an obvious impediment to that, particularly when you're talking to people who currently sit in Texas. I mean, the very first thing that you hear from them is an income tax. So with a decentralized set of employees who can sort of operate from wherever they have a wireless signal, it's a huge, the tax code has a great deal of influence over our opportunity to grow in Georgia.
Basically the income tax.
The income tax, yes.
I'll have to say, again, with Internet Network Services, let me explain what we do a little bit further. No one knows from that name. We are an internet service provider, first and foremost, to businesses. Secondly, we operate data centers throughout the U.S. and internationally. Have approximately 48 data center sites throughout the world, in Europe and throughout Asia. Our company actually came to Georgia from Seattle in 2001. And although I'm fairly certain, even though I wasn't with the company at that time, the Georgia headquarters credit did give an incentive for us to come. It by far was not the primary reason. Much more involved in the decision-making was the educated educated workforce coming from the technical college and Georgia Tech and so forth in downtown Atlanta, but also Atlanta at that time especially was becoming a telecom and media center in the early 2000s. So a lot of our decision-making was based on market.
Is it still becoming a telecom center?
You know, in our line of business we are a seller to other businesses and not small businesses, usually the larger multimedia type companies. We do see a lot of customers coming from the Atlanta area, and we focus here, and rightfully so with our headquarters here, but California is still a major competitor for that type of industry through Silicon Valley and LA.
The headquarters tax credit was important.
Yes.
Do you know?
We've approximately benefited several million over the 10 years that we've taken that.
Okay. What would you say? Rank it as tax policy is important to your clients?
Yeah, so I put it, frankly, in the middle of the pack. It's not the most important thing in terms of decision making, but it can be an impediment in certain cases. One example is that a study was done at Georgia Tech saying 40% of the venture-backed companies leave the state within 5 years of receiving funds, and there's a number of reasons they get pulled out of the state. But there's also, from a standpoint of, if you think about technology, I would say we're still strong in telecom. We have certain industries that we're leading the country in payment processing, health IT, we're becoming very strong in. Also in the area of telecom, in the area of security, smart grid, we have a lot of potential. There's 180,000 technology jobs in the state. I would hazard to say that in this tough economy, we're probably one of the only industries that didn't totally get whacked in terms of unemployment. We're still at about the same place that we were. Some companies have been robust in terms of their growth. If they can show an ROI, it's really important. I think the things that they're interested in, and we did a survey of our membership, so they told us as we prepared for this, one is retraining dollars. They want to make sure that stays in place. In fact, they're looking to see that even be more aggressive with that. And there's some specific things that I've provided you that I think would be important. You know, professional services, we'd like to not see that be increased in terms of the tax side, as was said earlier. And then also there's a specific benefit for $15 million and up for computers, and that's sort of like in manufacturing, you have your capital, so that's a major capital investment that we'd want to make sure that they continue to get their tax base. But it's important. I think when we talk to our companies like NCR moved to town, First Data moved to town. Why did they come to town? Well, the CEO of First Data said they came to town because there's a strong cluster of financial technology companies here. And they felt it was important for talent to be part of that. Red Hat is looking in the paper recently, a $750 million company to move here, and they said that you know, the airport is certainly a key because they need to travel all over the world quickly. So there are things that are of higher importance, but we want to make sure that we incentivize the companies. Our young companies are desperate for investment capital and venture capital. We're not as strong as we need to be in that area. We get about 2% of the total venture capital investment. California gets 50%, so we're not getting our fair share. So that's an important piece. We need to stimulate that.
Thanks. Carol? How important is tax policy in all the factors that matter to your clientele?
Well, what we see when we're talking to companies and they're trying to make a decision, it's really based on their overall business costs. In the emerging industries, it's a little bit different from the traditional in that talent really is key. So the tax burden may have some significance, but if you don't have the talent, then it really doesn't matter. That pretty much eliminates every consideration. So we're very much average when it comes to our tax burden. What we find, though, is talent, access to capital, and access to the global market. Those are the three things that emerging industries really look for. So where we've done things to help with the emerging markets, to help on the access to capital, is things like the quality job tax credit, which you can then take against payroll withholding. Helping them to get that much needed cash, retain that cash, or get that cash in their pockets to reduce that cost is what's much more important than the overall tax burden. Where we do come into a little bit of competition is when we're competing against Texas, which is what he mentioned in terms of personal income tax. Because again, you're talking about much higher paid individuals making a higher salary, and you're now looking at competing states such as Florida, Tennessee, Texas, where personal income tax is not an issue.
Carter, is there something that the state could do to incentivize the kinds of jobs that you create?
Well, I mean, as a blunt answer comes to mind, I guess. I'm new in this position, and this firm was just bought by a private equity company, and then now they're pumping capital in, and that's going to result in the creation of a lot of jobs over the next 12 months. And, I and those of my household are paying a great deal of income taxes, and these new jobs are going to be created in Texas, or they're going to be created in Georgia, and the pushback that I get is the income tax. So, I mean, the obvious answer that comes to mind, and it's a continuum. At some point, there are a lot of benefits to living here, and I live here, so, it's easy for me to say that, but, I do, and those members of my team travel a lot. Atlanta, Hartsfield is a tremendous asset. It's a tremendous quality of living here, but, it is a cost continuum. I mean, this company generates $42 million with 17 employees, so these are well-paid people that are, and income tax hits pretty hard. So, I think that, does the income tax have to be zero to level the playing field? I don't think that it has to be zero, but where it is now is you get pushback from people that know they don't have to live in Atlanta. I don't have to live in Atlanta to do my job. If you want me to come to Atlanta to see you, I'll come to Atlanta. But I'm not going to live in Atlanta to do my job because there's a 6% income tax. So, working on that number will be the key determinant in these jobs that are being created in 2011 and where those jobs occur.
Have you found the workforce in Georgia?
I'm sorry?
Is education, K-12, an issue for your people?
No. I mean, these people are graduate school educated.
I understand that, but for their families, is K-12?
Oh, no. That's not a pushback.
Anybody else have a view on that? Tino?
Yeah, we see that as an issue with technology companies that are here, and those are looking to come here. The higher education system has great reports. Also, the Hope Scholarship is well respected here, so I think that's a good thing. But, we're our own worst enemy to some degree because we talk a lot about water, transportation, education, so that word gets out there to the other folks in terms of a recruitment effort, and Carol might add to that. But certainly, I think improving the K-12 education will help us to retain our companies that are here and then bring in more companies. That's an impediment, I think.
Carol, do you have a view on that?
It comes up in conversation, I think, as Tino said, mainly because I think we report about it so much here. So people do ask us, but our jobs mainly are educated, very highly educated, often master's degree, PhD level. So where it becomes an issue, I think, is when we're competing against, to be honest with you, our neighboring states like in North Carolina. But for the most part, it doesn't come up too much. What they really like is the Hope Scholarship. That's a big sell, and people are very amazed, and it speaks very highly that we put that money towards education. So companies actually like that, and they like that a lot.
Do you have a comment on that?
My only comment to that would be the people that are making the decisions about companies coming to Georgia are at the C-level suite level. The higher level people who usually are more than likely, I hate to say it, will have their kids in private education, or they'll move to the areas where the higher ranked schools are, and that's a personal decision for them, and they're going to find the best schools in Georgia. And I don't think that they look at the state average and say, well, I'm not sending my company there because Johnny will be at a school with a lower average than North Carolina or something to that effect. So I don't see the K-12 being an issue.
Thank you. Let's talk about sales tax for just a minute. We've talked about broadening the base and lowering the rate, and someday we'll figure out what that means. How important is sales tax to the people you represent? Let's go around the panel. The sales tax in Georgia is 6 or 7%, depends. Is that a big deal or not a big deal?
That's an easy one for us. As an internet service provider, we are exempt under the Internet Tax Freedom Act of 2008. So for collecting some of the payments we do make on equipment, but that's not a huge burden that is noticed as much.
That's good to know.
No.
Not a factor.
No, it's not a big deal.
Do you know, Carol?
No.
I mean, we're a proponent of what's been said a lot of trying to broaden the base, and you talked about the 118 different activities you're looking at. There's some areas we think need to be protected, like professional services, and the concern, when we had a conversation the other day, is, well, won't they just pass that along to their customers? And the answer would be yes, most likely, but then the issue becomes, what does that put us in terms of a competitive position against other states that may not be having to drive their costs up, because we're a global marketplace now, and all of our technology companies here and the people that buy from the technology companies, the tech-enabled companies, are going to make a decision based on, I mean, Coca-Cola doesn't look at Georgia for buying things from Georgia specifically. They're going to find the best price. So I think this industry in a lot of ways is very price sensitive, and we want to keep our companies as competitive as they can be.
How do we stack up relative to South Carolina, Tennessee, and Alabama? I'll forget Florida for a minute because that's sort of a different. If you were talking about adding jobs in one of those three places, where would we stack up? First, second, third? I know that Tennessee has no income tax, but their sales taxes have gotten pretty doggone outrageous.
Well, since I'm here to represent primarily the interactive entertainment industry, we stack up very well. In comparison to the states you just mentioned, I would say that Georgia is definitely first. We stack up very well. We have the talent here, we have the access here, and of course we have a very competitive tax incentive. So those aren't really major competitors for us in the interactive entertainment industry.
I would say we compete with Tennessee in the health area. So health IT, if you look at Research Triangle, Nashville, Tennessee, and Atlanta, Georgia, we really control most of the health industry in many ways in the U.S. So I think that's competitive. We don't typically benchmark against South Carolina and Alabama. We do benchmark against Alabama, North Carolina, and Florida. So those are, we benchmark in technology. It's Massachusetts, Texas, California, North Carolina, and Florida are the states that we look at in terms of how do we stack up against them. And from those...
And how do we stack up?
I think that Florida and North Carolina are much more aggressive in terms of getting and keeping companies than we are right now. Texas made a $300 million investment in technology in the last couple years, and they're really pumping money in these young companies. And there was a study, Roger might know this, I think it was Forbes, but I'm not positive, but it looked at the 10 best cities to build your business, and 8 of them were in Texas. So Texas is really coming on very strong.
Don't mess with Texas. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the comparison that I deal with with these folks is Georgia and Texas. Now, relative to Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and speaking about more generally beyond the firm medical devices, I think that Atlanta and Georgia stack up extremely well. Just the education of the workforce, the transportation infrastructure. There's no place you can live in Tennessee that approximates what you can get with Hartsfield, really North Florida. So
ditto North Carolina too, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But the people, Texas. How many times are we going to say that? But what it's being compared to more is like Dallas and DFW, can provide a similar sort of transportation infrastructure.
Interesting question. And for our industry, we're very market central located. I mean, there are certain markets we have to be in because our customers are there, in New York City. And I still don't understand why, because we could go to New Jersey and put us internet line over there and connect to them. But yet, we have to have a presence in New York City to actually get New York City customers. So we have to deal with that kind of a tax authority, I would say. If we want to compare that, there's no comparison. Georgia's great. But the other big cities in Miami, we operate in, I don't see them comparing at all to Georgia. Georgia's very well respected and looked at as for the transportation for the global community even, all around Atlanta and the whole Georgia area is seen as a very positive place.
Let me tell you a conclusion I'm drawing from this very thoughtful panel, and that is that we are empowered as a group to try to look at the tax code of Georgia in the interest of creating jobs, growth. And your companies and your industries that you represent are particularly attractive ones in addition to the ones we heard from this morning or earlier this afternoon. And yet I can't find that any particular aspects other than some credits for jobs, any aspect of the tax code is going to matter a lot. Am I hearing that wrong?
I don't think it's, in general, I think I've heard everybody say it's not the #1 issue, but there are things like last year an angel tax credit was passed. We think that's really important because a lot of people have been sitting on the sidelines in terms of making investments, and we think that will help stimulate activity, get people back investing, and help these young companies. Some of them are going out of business because they don't have enough support. I know, and Carol can speak better to this, but the whole gaming tax credit, where now we've become a #2 in the nation maybe, or #3 in terms of films being here, entertainment taking place here. There's major studios moving here, so I don't want to steal your thunder, but I mean, I think that's, there's some really important things that we can do, so I'm not making light of it in any way. It's just a matter that, we do look at the airports, we do, data centers because of the infrastructure here. You mentioned 48. I was with some data center folks the other day, and most of them are members of TAG, and the number we came up with was 41 major data centers here from 41 different companies that are in Georgia. So in a lot of these areas, we're well positioned. Now, what does the tax piece have to do with that? I think, as more money we can keep in these, particularly these young companies' pockets where they can then reinvest them in talent and pay those high-paying jobs is going to be key. So.
Well, I do think there's some things that we could look at. One is the R&D tax credit. These companies, again, innovation's key. The only way that the emerging industry companies will survive and be successful is to keep on innovating. They've got to keep up with new technology. So the R&D tax credit is one that I think that we can look at. We have done some things with it in terms of for new companies. We made it where they could take it against payroll withholding, which again, that's helping them to retain cash, much needed cash. I think most of the tax credits in the past have been more geared towards our traditional industries. For the gaming industry, again, they need cash. They need that upfront cash. Should we look at ways? Of course, these are more risky. So should we look at ways that we can maybe incent, more people to invest in these companies? Should we, look at ways that we can help them to retain more cash as opposed to having tax credits that are meaningless to them because they don't have a corporate income tax liability? So I wouldn't discount the fact that there aren't things that we could look at. I just think that we have to make sure that we're all educated because in terms of this kind of industries. These industries don't create 1,000 jobs in one pot. We're talking companies that could be startup companies that had 5 employees all the way up to Fortune 100, meaning along that life cycle, we have to make sure that we support them every step of the way. And I'm not sure that our tax incentives are geared towards making that we're supporting them all the way through. We do a great job investing, but we got to make sure that we keep them here. If we're going to put that money in the universities, what can we do to make sure that we also keep them here?
And in the keeping them here sense, Tino, let's go back to this one more time. Keeping them here is a function of providing cash or capital or or seed money or angel investors or second round investors, or you name it?
For the young companies, I would say yes. There are companies that have moved here. I'll use CBeyond as an example. Most of you know CBeyond's now a public company. Good company. It came here with 3 people from Florida, and now it's grown into a company that probably has 1,000 employees, really well respected here in the community. So some of them have been able to move through those steps. I think for the young companies, it's definitely talent, capital, and kind of keeping out of their way, not having any sort of a burden in terms of any kind of laws that would make them make decisions whether they're going to move forward or not. But I think for the young companies, for the existing companies, it's things like retraining dollars and just ways that we can show that we can support their continued growth, as Carol said, kind of through their continuum. But certainly for young companies, it's investment, capital, making those dollars available to them so that they can make decisions. The other thing that's not a tax issue, but we talk about stickiness and how do you get the large companies like the Home Depots and the Coca-Colas to actually in some way connect with these younger companies to make there be more of a reason to stay here. It might be having somebody from their board or something along those lines, not necessarily tax related, but to make those connections is important.
Either of you want to add anything to that? Yes.
Let me reiterate. Carol said it's very important. The refundable credits are very important, like they were to Internet. The headquarters credit, we've been able to take the cash benefit against our payroll withholding. Without that, the credits would have been meaningless because we did invest a lot of money in the first few years of the company and have substantial net operating losses carrying forward. So income tax is not an issue for us in the state of Georgia and won't be for several years. So that's refundability.
Anybody else want to ask a question of this distinguished group? Yeah, Gary.
Carol, when you mentioned obviously the 3 most important things, talent, access to capital, and access to the markets, I know that's pretty tried and true. And then I believe that Tino mentioned we're getting 2% of the capital investment here versus 50% in California. Just that seems to be something, and we've heard this before, so this is not the first time we've heard this. Now, we passed a law, I believe, in the last session, which sort of got the state of Georgia more into trying to make loans more available to startup businesses. And perhaps a legislator, if there's one left here, might embellish that. But what is it? Since capital investment in Georgia is low, and it's been said by other speakers, how do you enhance capital investment? Is it because we don't have many companies out there trying to get capital investment? I mean, why is it that we're not getting the capital investment or the startup investment or the seed money or however you want to say it?
Yeah, well, angel and VC dollars, so we're not getting the amount that we need. There are a lot of young entrepreneurial companies here, not just out of the universities, but also you take a company like ISS that sold to IBM, and then the 2 founders of ISS went out and basically are running 2 more companies now. And we have a tree, kind of a growing tree in our office from some of those early companies and how they built on the others. So there's a lot of activity in that area. A few things we're trying to do is we have a venture capital conference coming up. We'd love to have anybody here attend that, where we're bringing in about 100 VCs from around the country, and we're showcasing 40 of Georgia's best companies that are looking for investment dollars. So we're trying to make people more aware around the country that Georgia's a good place to come in and invest. I think that the state could look at more ways to, again, it's not the time to do that necessarily, but to create a pot of dollars that could be used for that. We also are the only state in the nation that doesn't allow our pension funds to be used for alternative investments, except for the firefighters that was passed last year, which is looked on with the other parts of the country as kind of a sore subject for us, because it's like, why aren't we moving along with if our own state isn't looking to make those kinds of investments. So there's some things we could do. I think a lot of it is awareness and promotion of our companies. We're not going to be bringing new VC firms in here, I don't believe, in mass, but we could bring some, because it's a global marketplace now that are in other parts of the country, and hopefully they'll come in and invest, and we'll have enough stickiness here where the company doesn't leave and go to California or wherever the investment came from.
To your, I mean, there's a critical mass of venture capital in California, and you know, I've seen it happen, you've seen it happen, and I've been working with you for years on this. First 2 or 3 rounds, they stay here, but then when the VC seriously gets involved, they say, all right, come on out to Palo Alto. Is that still the case?
Yes, but that also has a lot to do with the fact that the senior management and the talent that's needed at that level to take the startup company to the next level, that's an issue here in Georgia. And it's hard to get some of that talent to come here because we don't have a critical mass in a lot of these emerging industries. So what some states have done is they're looking at ways that they can help to provide assistance to relocate that type of talent. What can we do to encourage that type of talent at that level to come here? So you sort of look at one of 2 ways. Do you want to incent trying to get the talent here, or do you want to incent people to invest here? You know, you have several options that you can look at.
That's a new thought. We should talk about that more offline. Yes.
For medical devices, Georgia is an unbelievable incubator of new medical device concepts that go on to become great businesses. I mean, if all of those stayed here, we would have an unbelievable medical device industry here. And Tino mentioned the exit rate in the first 5 years, and I think that goes up pretty dramatically at a 10-year.
10 years is 75% out.
75%. And that's when they're really creating the jobs. It takes a while to get it together. It takes a while to get the patents. It takes a while to get through FDA. You know, it's a process. Another thing that Georgia really lacks, too, is you have to have a cluster, and that gets thrown around a lot, too. But entrepreneurs are gamblers. And if I'm going to start a company and I'm going to take all the risk that goes along with that, if I do that in Georgia and I fail in medical devices, there's not a robust medical device industry here, or biotech. Say I have some compound and I do a biotech startup here and I run it out of cash, and now my team is on the street. They're on the street in Georgia. There's no other biotechs here to go to. That's one of the reasons that you go to Palo Alto, because over the 2 years that it takes you to run out of cash, you get to know Roy and you get to know AD and so, and you guys know what's going on way before I run out of cash, and you know I'm a talented guy, and you know my team are talented people. So then if we fail and it's a high-risk endeavor, then you know there's a lot of other places to fall into.
A lot of other networks to fall into.
Absolutely.
Critical mass, it seems to me, is a major concern. Yes?
Yes, and I think what prohibits the early stage of critical mass is there's no early stage funding here. So I mean, you can keep them here for a little while. There are high net worth individuals here and angels and folks like that, but you know, and Georgia's going to have to be willing to do that without a lot of thanks from the market for a while, because it takes a while to build a cluster. That's not going to happen overnight.
The only thing I would add to that is, and I agree with it, is we do have these clusters. So sometimes we, as again, not as much tax related, but I like to say we focus on the sexy versus the sensible. You know, here's an industry we want to go ahead and take ownership of that industry, and we really don't have a critical mass. We may have 1 or 2 companies, and then you know that company may leave. But we do have areas, and I would include medical device as well. But the health IT, the security, we're number 3 in the nation in terms of security. The financial technologies. So to look at those just like Jack Walsh and saying if you're not in the top 2, you should maybe not be focusing on that. But in some of ours, if we could focus on those clusters and build those clusters, then I think we have a great, and entertainment is another area. So that there is potential, most potential in those areas.
Roy, you got anything?
Continue to build on the strengths.
Dave? Okay, I take away from this panel then, if I may, that taxes matter as part of the mix, but not number 1. Number 2 is critical mass probably matters as much as anything. And if there's a way to use tax policy to create critical mass or to sustain people who are here and encourage others to join, it would be a good thing. Is that fair?
Yes.
Carol?
One point I want to emphasize is that because we are trying to grow a lot of these emerging industries, we have to be a lot more competitive. So I think the tax incentives more aggressive that we are in terms of showing that these are industries that we really do understand are industries of the future, they tip the scales in our favor. Otherwise, I think that people just sort of say, well, that's just an industry, sort of as Tina says, that they're just sort of dabbling in. But to really show that we are being competitive, a film tax credit was a great example. You know, based on what we've done with that, we've seen, you know, more than double in terms of the projects that are coming into the state. So some states have decided that they want to be targeted in terms of what type of industries that they want to go after. And they've just really decided to take some incentives and make them geared towards just those industries. And that could be something that we might want to look at. I think we've started to do that some with the quality job tax credit by rewarding those types of companies. But again, that's just the consideration that I think that maybe you guys would all want to look at discussing.
As a homework assignment, I'd appreciate it if you, all four of you would give us your top 5 industries that we ought to target to create clusters in Georgia. You do it?
Right now?
No, as a homework assignment. We'll get it from you later. Okay? I want to thank you all for being here this afternoon. It's late in the day, and you've provided us some interesting and challenging thoughts about what we need to do and what we don't. We thank you for being citizens of Georgia. We thank you for bringing your companies here, and we thank you for taking the time to share what you've learned.
Thanks.
With no further business to conduct, we'll declare these proceedings adjourned.